I, I'm certain that a few more board members will be joining in the next few minutes, but there being a quorum present, I want to call to order this public hearing of the Chittenden Solid Waste District for the purpose of the presentation of the proposed FY23 preliminary budget. That budget was presented or accepted by the board at our November board meeting, and the purpose of this meeting is to give the public a chance to hear about the budget and ask questions, and we will take questions from the public. I see that there's some unfamiliar names on my Zoom screen. I don't know if these are members of the public or are here for other business. But at this point, Sarah, I'll just turn it over to you for a little guidance and walking us through this public hearing.
Sure. Thank you. So as Paul mentioned, this is part of our charter requirements. We are required in our charter to present a preliminary budget to our board by December 1st. We did that in the November 2021 board meeting. And we are also required to hold a public hearing no later than January 31st. So that is what this meeting tonight is doing, is fulfilling that obligation in our charter. The preliminary budget was included in the packet for tonight's meeting. We also included a more expanded view in the November board packet as well. And in my memo at the time in the November meeting, I did describe some of the potential impacts of the very high 2021, particularly towards the end of the year, going into 2022 consumer price index. So at that time in that memo to the board, I indicated that it is very likely that the budget that comes before you in April for approval to be disseminated to our member cities and towns could look quite different. So we have already seen some of the areas where we will most certainly be reviewing at the Finance Committee. And last night, the Finance Committee did meet and agreed to the schedule for the budget meetings, which will be in March this year. So staff is taking this next several weeks to finalize their budgets, and then we will begin the Finance Committee review process in the first week of March. So because the CPI was so large, the largest that we'd seen in over a decade, I did not do what has become our standard practice, which was to take the previous year's budget, apply a moderate CPI 1.5% to 2% across all of the expenses and the revenues. Consider that our preliminary budget, with the knowledge that the actual draft budget would most likely look different. I did go in this time, and where I could apply some more realistic numbers, we did that. One of the areas that we did that in was for the solid waste management fee estimate. And as the board will recall, we hired Lisa Slumetz Associates about a year or two ago to develop a model for us to help us to more accurately predict what the solid waste management fee revenue would be for any upcoming year. So that number is going to stay. That is not going to change because we did use that model. So again, looking back in the more detailed version that was presented to the board in November, that solid waste management fee estimate is not looking to change. And the whole reason for presenting a preliminary budget in November by December 1 is to let our cities and towns know whether or not we intend as a district to assess any kind of a per capita fee, any municipal assessment. And again, in my memo in November, I said that we will not be doing that this year for this upcoming fiscal 23, so that our cities and towns had plenty of time to develop their budgets and they would know that there was no need to account for any municipal assessment. We also recognized we had several Finance Committee meetings this past year where we looked at, as again the board may recall, we brought to you a reserves policy and a new approach to distributing funds across our different reserves. And at the last Finance Committee, prior to this one in December, the committee decided that they would use this, ask staff to use the proposed procedure in the development of this budget, and then the committee would look at that, how that worked. Did it work well? Did it not work well? Does there need to be any changes? But as part of the budget review process, in case the board was curious as to where that ended up. So that last finance committee meeting, that was what decided at the December 14th meeting. So that is the approach there. And again, this is part of our normal process. So at this point, what we would do is open up to the members of the public who may have comments or questions. In general, in these public hearings, there's not back and forth. So it is our responsibility as a board to accept the comments and to take that into our deliberations as far as how we prepare the budget, and then to make sure that we're hearing from the public regarding any concerns or questions they may have.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, I can see that there are many, we have good attendance and folks that I do not recognize as regular attendees at the meeting. Are there members of if there are members of the public who wish to comment or ask a question, I invite you to do so now. If you have the ability to use the hand raise function on Zoom, that's helpful. Otherwise, if I can't see you, then just go ahead and start talking. And if we have two people talking at one time, we'll figure out a way to have an order and get all the questions posed to the board. Thank you.
And Paul, there is also the chat feature. So if for some reason we're not seeing a hand raised, please do put the question in the chat and we can recognize it there as well.
So again, now is the time for members of the public to pose their question or make a comment. I am seeing, nor am I hearing any comments. So I believe then there are no members of the public wishing to address the board. And I think our next action would be to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved, Essex.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second, Jerko.
Thank you. All those. I'm sorry.
I would clarify that we are voting to close the public hearing. So we're not
yes.
to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you very much. This motion is to close the public hearing. And once it's closed, we'll move right into our regular board meeting. It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? The public hearing then is closed and we're ready to move on to the regular agenda of the Chittenden Solid Waste District. The first, and we do have a quorum present. We'll proceed with this agenda. The first item on the agenda is the agenda itself. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda that board members would request? Seeing and hearing none, then the agenda will be approved as presented. The next item on the agenda, item number 2, is the public comment period. Are there any members of the public who would wish to address this regular board meeting? Hearing and seeing no members of the public wishing to address the board, we'll move on to item number 3, which is the consent agenda, which consists of the minutes of the December 15th, 2021 meeting, board meeting, program updates, executive director update. I did not notice the finance update, item 3.4 in the consent agenda. So that should be, for the record, I think it should be stricken so that should the consent agenda be approved, we don't mistakenly look back and think that that item was approved. The last item in the consent agenda was the solid waste implementation plan inclusion. Are there any requests to remove something from anything from the consent agenda? Hearing none, we will accept the consent agenda as presented, and we can move on then to item number 4, which is the solid waste management ordinance. That begins on page 23 of your board packet. This has been presented to us before, but I believe there's been some changes. And at that point, I'll turn it over to Sarah to bring that matter before us.
Actually, I would like to bring Josh Estee in, Director of Compliance and Safety, to address any of the changes and any correspondence that he has had through his department at this point, and just to describe really what we're asking of the board tonight. Josh?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so tonight really is requesting this should be the full board's first time seeing the proposed changes in their totality. They've been presented to the executive board a couple times at this point. And so at this point, all of the changes that are being proposed are being brought to the full board, and the ask tonight is for you all to approve us as staff to go out for a 30-day public comment period for these proposed changes. And what that really entails is us doing our normal outreach as far as publishing it in a paper, putting on our website, doing our standard outreach, as well as hosting a public meeting to solicit feedback on the proposed changes. The proposed changes have already been sent to our hauler community as those likely to be more impacted by some of the proposed changes. So that outreach process has started. We have not received any comments back so far from the hauling community. So, and then afterwards, after the 30-day public comment period is up, we will bring all of the feedback back to you all, and that'll be at the March board meeting. And we'll have we'll review all the feedback that we've received, as well as any changes that we've made to the proposed changes in light of that feedback. And at that point, we'll ask for the approval of the changes. So that'll be at the March board meeting. So tonight is just for public comment. As Sarah mentioned, the few changes have been made since the last time they've been brought to you. As I wrote in my memo, staff believes the few changes that have been made are mostly clarifying in nature and not significant in nature, which is why we didn't go back through another round of presenting to the exec board. But certainly willing to answer any questions about those or any of the other proposed changes. And then afterwards, there is a board request at the end of the memo.
Thank you, Josh. Sarah, do you have any other comments at this point, or we're ready to open it up to see if the board members have any questions?
Ready to open it up.
Invite board members then to raise your hand, be recognized, and ask your questions.
Lee?
Yeah, I was reviewing some of the additions and changes in 3.10 rental and multi-unit property requirements. I'm wondering if maybe, I don't know about the requirements of this. I know in Burlington, we have a lot of new Americans, and we've been doing a lot of translation in a lot of our materials to get out to residents. And I'm just wondering if some properties of that 1 to 5 unit, if that may be a requirement, because even in our recycling, I went out on the truck the other night to help the guys out and noticed some contamination, and it's around, some of the properties like Franklin Square, Northgate, stuff like that. I just wonder if maybe some language like that could be added just to help out. I don't know what anybody else's thoughts are on that. I know it's helped us out a lot in like our snow bans and saving people toes and stuff like that. So
Lee, would you mind just explaining a little bit more what the language would be? Are you talking about actually having translations available to those
yeah,
folks
so
and putting that in the ordinance?
Yeah, so I could check with our P&I department as well and see what kind of messaging they put out. But we do have like our snow bans, our tow message. We even have translators available for phone calls as well if people call in. I forget how many languages we are doing right now, but I think it's around like 5 or 6 plus languages. I could send you what we do for our snow bans, or maybe Rob Goulding, our public communications manager, can give me some examples. I can send them over to you.
We do have some of our materials have been translated into 5 or 6 different languages as of several years ago, but I am not sure if we have had the chance to update those translations yet for any changes we've made. So if I'm understanding the request, Lee, and maybe I'm not hearing it clearly, are you asking for us to put in the ordinance or to suggest in the ordinance for comment that the information be translated per the need of the tenants?
Yes,
Okay. As part of the requirements for the landlord.
property owner.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other,
I second, I support that request. Winooski has at least 7 different languages that we translate notices into, so it would be beneficial for our municipality as well.
thank you, Bryn. Leslie, your hand was up?
Yes, I like the fact that Lee raised this issue. I think when the staff are doing public presentations, it might be good to try to arrange some interpreters or translators to be present, maybe, if that's feasible for Burlington and Winooski, where we know there are concentrations of English as a second language.
I know that Michelle and her team have worked pretty extensively in the past few years. I don't think since COVID, but I can double check with several of the New American groups working in Burlington and in Winooski. So we can definitely verify that and double check that and see if that's something that we want to make sure is updated. So I really appreciate this comment.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought and something that we can definitely consider. As for what the language might be in there, you know, I can only speculate at this point, but it's definitely worth having the conversation. Thank you, Lee. Appreciate that.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Logan.
Just tagging on it, I heard in my colleagues' comments, you know, Burlington and Winooski in particular, but there are a number of sort of New American communities in other towns. So if we're going to do this, I think we should make it a uniform practice across towns and member municipalities and not just limit it to the 2. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. The resources that we've worked with happen to be in Burlington and Winooski, but the materials are available for anyone who may need them. So we could also do additional outreach just to make sure that we're not missing, you know, some communities that may have happened to settle, you know, in Richmond, for example, that fall outside of kind of the known group of folks that we're working with. So we will certainly expand that outreach. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryn.
Thanks. I'm looking at the definition and use of the term compostables and CSWD's recent policy change for Green Mountain Compost and the inclusion of foodware products. Just maybe want to walk through your thoughts on keeping that in here. Obviously, it gets into some of the nuances of the management of those materials, but it might be beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bryn. I will knock that around with some members of staff. I know these changes were sort of initiated quite some time ago, certainly before we had this compostable ban. You know, I think it's certainly worth considering whether we want to take that out of the language. the only thought that I'm thinking of is if at some point in the future, we do want to start accepting the materials again, whether we want to leave that in just on the off chance that we do want to start incorporating again, if something changes as far as the certification process goes, just leaving it open, but certainly worthwhile to have that conversation to see if we want to omit that piece of the definition.
Certainly, I see it as we wanted, our goals are to divert as much material as possible, while also ensuring the integrity of the systems that help divert those materials. And with a new facility online to manage packaging materials, I don't know if it's worth having a new definition or intending, maybe not this round, but in a very near future, adding some additional language to capture that and to differentiate it.
Yeah, I will say that we already do have another running list going of the next round of changes, of course. So if it doesn't make it on this one, we'll certainly tag it onto the list for the next round.
And then the other thought I had at the moment, while I'm kind of refreshing my memory on what's here. When was the last time the penalty amounts were revisited?
Those were updated actually the last time we went through the changes. So those have just recently been updated to mimic the state's penalty amount. So they went up from, I'm not looking at it right now, but I think from $500 to $800, I want to say, for maximum penalty. And that just happened in the last round of changes, which I believe was in 2018.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Other discussion from board members on the solid waste management ordinance?
Oops, I think.
Leslie.
Yeah, I can't, switching screens is, sorry.
Your screen, your video is off as well.
Yeah, sorry. The ordinance specifies the solid waste management fee at $27 a ton. Do we need some language in there which says this may be adjusted from time to time? And will be posted on our website and notified to haulers or something. I mean, it just seems odd that, we don't change our ordinance that often. Just a question.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to turn to Paul Stabler or Alan Nye as for some of the history, but from what I understand regarding the history of having the solid waste management fee in the ordinance is actually specifically for that reason, Leslie, and that was put in many years ago, I believe, at the request of the haulers, so that there would be a very public process when and if we do need to change the solid waste management fee. But I don't know if Alan or Paul, if you have any additional information or a different recollection, but that was my understanding, that that is exactly the point, was to go through a very formal process.
As I remember, you're right on, Sarah, that, before we can change it, we gotta, make a change to the ordinance, and it needs to, go through the same process.
The last 2 weeks. Lynn Fox was asking us for.
Somebody is speaking without their mute button on. If you could double check that you're muted. Thank you.
And I was just going to confirm what Alan said. I believe that is indeed the history and the case there regarding the fee.
So that doesn't mean that we need to keep that in place. If that is something that the board would like to consider, because Leslie, you're exactly right. It is definitely a process, as but that was the intention. If there's some other mechanism, that we want to consider, we can.
Well, I think I don't know if this is the right time and place, but it might be a topic for discussion. at some point down the road. Josh said they're already working on yet more changes, so there may be another opportunity to just think about that as a policy. But I certainly respect Alan and Paul Stabler's perspective on it, but it might be worth looking into and having a discussion sometime in the future.
It was, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. I mean, that was when the ordinance was getting approved. That was one of the biggest items, and we had a bunch of holler management board meetings with respect to it. And I would speak very highly of keeping the same process there, because it did stir up the holler community pretty significantly.
Brent?
So going back to the rental language in 3.10, I feel like it's just confusing to use and or in ordinance language. For all the renter multi-unit properties, responsibility for the collection, solid waste, recyclables, and or food residuals. I think it should just be and.
Okay.
Josh, do you recall if there was a specific rationale for and or?
I don't.
Unless is it tied to the contract? So it says responsibility for collection shall be demonstrated through a contract. So was perhaps the or to allow for backyard composting, for drop off? I wonder if that was.
Yeah, I do think that was the reason that the ownership would be attributed to either the owner or the renter for each of those three materials in the contract. And then if it wasn't spoken to in the contract, then as it says in there, the owner of the activity would be then responsible. And the reason we are being deliberately flexible in that language, it was brought up from our business outreach coordinator, because we do have so many of these different circumstances for these multi-unit properties. If you think of a strip mall, some of them are just, clothing storefronts versus restaurants versus fast food locations, dry cleaners, and they certainly
Are we
don't.
talking about residential properties? This is intended for a residential setting, not commercial?
Well, that
No,
particular
so
sentence.
the and or applies to that the second sentence for all other rental and multi-unit properties. So it's all others except for the 5+ residential unit properties.
So my apologies. So I confused that situation. So that second sentence is, as Josh said, just for businesses, so not residential commercial properties.
Is it possible to just break that out so we can differentiate rental from residential rental from commercial rental?
Yeah, we could do like a 3.10 A and B.
Because it just kind of, and then it goes on to talk about the Department of Health's rental housing code. So it's kind of going from one topic to another and back again.
Yeah, you've sort of unearthed the section that we've been struggling with significantly, just because there is all these different circumstances that we're trying to account for. we certainly can do a little more massaging of the language and try to clarify further. I do see Janine has her hand up. Janine's been integral and part of this process and all along. So, and she's also helped craft some of this language. So, Janine, if you want to tag in, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well, and that, you know, this has been a challenging, there's a lot in that section, not only with regard to the types of properties, but also the different facets of collection versus everything else that we're trying to cover. So we can work on it, Bryn, some more. One of the things we struggle with, we're seeing a lot of these kind of mixed use properties, right? Where they have the commercial on the first floor, but the upper 3 floors are residential. And so there's a little bit of a mix in there, but we'll work on it a little bit more and see if we can make it clearer.
Yeah, I have read a lot of regulations and policies, and I haven't ever seen an and or used. So whatever you need to do to clean that up in particular would be great.
Yeah, I do think that was, we were trying to apply to those situations where, yeah, maybe there was a contract that covered trash and recycling, but they were dealing with food scraps on site or something like that. But we'll work on it.
Sounds good.
Other board commentary, questions, suggestions? I'm hearing none. We'll moving forward. The board action requested is to approve the recommended changes. There is a resolution that appears on page 24 of our board packet. Are we ready for action on that resolution?
So Paul, the resolution is to allow us to initiate the 30-day comment period. So this may still change. So I want to be clear that everyone's aware that most likely, based on certainly these comments we've heard tonight, but any additional comments we may receive, what you've seen here will most likely change. So what we're asking for is to permit us to initiate the 30-day public hearing, public comment period.
But this is, but you're just to reinterpret it, this is not the final, we're not finalizing this, we're not approving a final document tonight. We're only furthering the process.
Right.
Leslie, your hand is up.
I'm just moving the resolution.
Thank you. Do we have a second for the resolution? It should be read out, please.
Yep, I can read it for you, Paul.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The Chittenden Solid Waste District's Board of Commissioners hereby resolves to permit district staff to initiate a 30-day public comment period seeking feedback on proposed amendments to the solid waste management ordinance as presented at this meeting on January 26, 2022.
Thank you, Leslie. I would presume your moving of this motion would stand. Do we have a second?
This is Logan from Richmond. I'll second that.
Thank you, Logan. It's been moved and seconded to pass this resolution. I won't read it again or characterize it, but is there further discussion on the resolution? I'm hearing none. We can do a voice vote on this, I believe. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Please say nay. Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all. I do have to hop off, but I do appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Josh. The next item on the agenda is item number 5, which begins on page 67 of your board packet. Before we get to that, I just want to make a couple of introductory comments that, as usual, the process I'd like to follow is for Sarah and our invited consultants to make their presentation. And after that presentation, then open it up to board members for them to ask their questions. I want to note that Sarah did ask in sending out the board packet for board members to submit questions in writing. Several did, and there were numerous questions and good questions. But I want to just remind all board members that doesn't preclude you from asking questions at this meeting as well. And I also want to state that I'll try my best to follow the usual practice of allowing each member to ask an initial question and then go around the board and give every member a chance to ask a question before we go back to a board member and allowing them to ask subsequent questions. That's, I think, very helpful for all our board members, and I want to encourage as much member participation as possible. Also want to note that this is a two-part presentation. This is the first part tonight. There'll be a second part next month. If there are questions that are raised tonight that cannot be quickly or adequately answered, there is time to have them researched and answered at the next meeting. Or if a question comes up after the meeting, you'll have the opportunity. This is a very important topic, and we don't want to close off any questions or the opportunity to get them answered. Finally, I just want to point out there is no action intended to be taken tonight. This is informational. There will be the opportunity. Well, we will be taking action on it either at the February meeting or perhaps at the March meeting. That would be the intent. My last request is, as this opens, Sarah, as you open it up with their members from SCS here, when they begin to speak, if they could just identify themselves for the benefit of all board members so we know who it is that's talking. Thank you. That's my long-winded intro. I will now turn it over to you, Sarah.
Lovely. You gave all the information that I was going to give. So well done. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, this is, again, part of the, just hopefully getting towards the decision-making point for the conversation about the MRF that we've been having off and on, more on lately than off, since 2017. So this has been something that we've been talking about as a board, as a district for quite some time, about the need. So tonight we do have our consultants from SCS Engineers who we engaged to do two things for us, to run a very high level cost benefit analysis, which is what you have in your packet tonight. And then next month we will be bringing the second part, which is a revenue sufficiency for the model. So Josh, I think you're going to do a very brief description and show some images of kind of the current MRF, an overview, Google Earth view, and then the location of the new, potentially the new MRF, should the board decide to approve that, because we do have some new board members, and I want to make sure that everyone kind of has the picture in their mind of what we're talking about. So we'll turn it over to Josh, and then Josh will introduce our folks from SCS.
All right. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see where I'm starting at here. Yell if you can't. So this, as Paul and Sarah mentioned, is the first step, or the first presentation in a two-part series for the economic analysis of a new materials recovery facility for the Chittenden Solid Waste District. This will go over the cost benefit analysis. The way it'll work is I'll just give a real brief introduction, just to get anybody who needs to be refreshed of what our existing MRF looks like, where we are proposing a greenfield, kind of go over the cost benefit options, and then I'll hand it over to the SCS team. I'll let them introduce themselves. When the SCS presentation is over, we did receive about 21 to 26 questions from board members. So I absolutely appreciate that. That gave us a chance to react to them. We will walk through those questions at the end of the SCS presentation so that all submitted questions will be addressed. Again, I can't thank you guys enough for doing that. That's really helpful for us to really kind of articulate our points. And then after that, we'll open it up to other questions. If you do have a question, as Paul had indicated, if you can't write it down, throw it in the chat. So just, because there's going to be a lot of information presented, and it may be, forthcoming that what you're thinking will be answered coming up. So with all that said, I'm just going to walk us through the basics of kind of where our existing facility is now. So the existing MRF is located in Williston. It's in the industrial section off of Industrial Drive. Here's just the basic site map. It's plopped over here by the Casella Waste Management Transfer Station and Baker Commodities. The existing footprint is about 3 acres. We've built as much as we can onto that 3 acres. We are surrounded by, on 2 sides, other other businesses, Baker Commodities, Casella Waste Management's transfer station. On the right in this picture We also have municipal road, and then kind of on the top of the picture, it's a significant drop off, and it's privately owned land, but we can't build. It drops about 65 feet down. So we are confined. We can't expand the actual footprint of the building. To give an overall view, it is a high level production facility. The 54,000 square feet, that's the rough area of our tip floor. That is where we bring the material into the facility. In the event the facility goes down, we have about a day and a half, 2 days of storage in the building. But that also comes with managing what comes into our facilities. Things from out of district will bypass us and go to the other facility in the state. Our processing floor is about 12,000 square feet in the existing facility. And our bale storage, that's the commodities we sell out on the open market, that area is about 3,500 square feet. As we've mentioned in previous discussions, these are identified as undersized for the amount of material we push through. We've had a great run in this facility. It's been a powerhouse. I commend our operating partners. They've done a great job in marketing this material, but when it comes to kind of expanding or planning for the future, these are the constraints that we're talking about. And there's a lot more nuance and detail. I'm just going over the larger picture things. Now, when we propose in the cost benefit analysis, the greenfield site, this little red star right here is where we're proposing our greenfield site. The district owns this land. It's off of Redmond Road. It's near our composting facility. It's still in Williston. Kind of zooming in on it, this has been identified as a very viable spot to build. It's roughly 5 acres for a facility. We also have approach space to bring in vehicles off the road. So it's got a lot of adequate spacing. It will be inlaid right next to the approach road you see there above it, and that goes to a Velco laydown space. We have been in communication with Velco, and they're exceptionally friendly to this concept. Here is just a super rough rendition of what it might look like in a greenfield setting. Along the top, that's Redmond Road. It's kind of flipped from what I just showed you. This would be Redmond Road. The idea is a longer approach space to get vehicles off the road. And then we would have our facility kind of up against that access road. This is a rough rendition when we did our initial assessment in 2018, 2019. Zooming in on that, the concept of this is that we would have 12,500 square feet of tipping floor. That would give us roughly 5 days of downtime in the event that something went wrong. We would have 30,000 square feet to process. And that really goes hand in hand with the technology we're looking at, because you need long runs to run optical sorters efficiently and get the best value out of them. Also, the bale storage area is about 12,000 square feet, almost 3.5 times larger than what we have now. And that allows for variability in transportation, which we've also seen. And we have had to, in our existing facilities, store material outside. Containers can be stored outside. Fiber, it's a really bad idea. So this allows us to hold, to make sure that we meet all of our FOB commitments. The white area has been identified as a place for expansion in the event that, whatever tonnages we land on an annual basis that are coming into the facility, if we exceed capacity, say in 20 years, this facility will have room to expand, which we identify as a great option, because if we had that now, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So that's kind of the basics on the concepts between the two. And then I'm showing these are the actual scenarios. So the status quo is using the existing facility I originally showed you and kind of just running it as is. It is dated. A lot of the equipment, it needs to be upgraded, but this would be kind of as it breaks, fix it. That's the concept. That is currently run at 40,000 tons annually into the facility, which is what we used as our starting point for our model. But as I showed you, there's no room to expand. So when we talk about expansion, we can't exceed 48,000 tons in the retrofit, or in the status quo. In the retrofit, same confined configuration, we feel like we could squeeze another 2,000 tons and hit maybe 50,000 tons, but it really would be taking what we have, putting new equipment in. We wouldn't get all the equipment we want. We wouldn't be able to sort to the level and purity that we would like to hit. We would just take the material we have now and clean it as best we could with the room we have to clean it. There wouldn't be certain redundancies built into the retrofit. And then the greenfield, there's 3 greenfield options. And the reason we chose 3 is because we wanted to look at the inbound tonnage, 35,000 tons per year in the first greenfield option. That would be to construct on the space that I just showed you. And it would be in the event that we didn't get any out of district tons. So that would be literally servicing Chittenden County, you know, with potentially flow control. But that was kind of what we feel Chittenden County can generate. 40,000 tons would be if we initiated flow control and then aggressively pursued tons besides the one we're seeing now. And then 50,000 would be if we actually start at the existing state we are currently at, which is roughly 48,000 tons to 50,000 tons. And then all 3 of the greenfields do have an inflator, assuming that we would see over the 25-year to 30-year life of this project an increase in tonnage, while the status quo and the retrofit do not. So that's kind of the basic rundown. From here, I'm going to get out of my share mode. And I will hand it over to Vita Quinn and Kellen and Robert. And if you guys want to introduce yourselves, go for it and I'll stop talking.
Hi, I'm Vita Quinn, Director of Management Services for SCS. I took the lead on this project. With me here, Kellen Maudlin is going to give a brief kind of overview of the analysis that we did. And then Bob Gardner, who I'll let him introduce himself, really weighed in as a technical advisor to understand the scenarios and the feasibility of all of the potential MRF scenarios. Bob, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Bob Gardner. I'm a Senior Vice President with SCS Engineers. I oversee SCS's solid waste practice nationwide. And I was kind of brought in to kind of a reality check relative to some of the assumptions that were being made regarding operation and maintenance of the facility and sizing of the facility. So I was kind of the fly on the wall to look at and kind of bounce against and see if things made sense or not.
Great, thanks, Bob. So as Vita said, I'm Kellen Maudlin. I am a financial management analyst with SCS Engineers, and I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation. All right, and let me know if everyone is not able to see.
We're good to go.
Good to go. All right, great. It'd be even better if I could forward my slides. There we go. Okay, my apologies. All right, that's the team. We've already introduced ourselves. So we go through a process when we do our cost benefit analysis, understanding the key issues of your specific municipality, your specific district, develop the scenarios. I'm not going to spend too much time on those. Josh did a great job at explaining the scenarios that we ran. And then we analyzed that, and we took that over a 30-year arc for this particular analysis. We looked at that both annually and cumulatively, and I will show you how that played out. And then in the end, we determined what are going to be your optimal scenarios or optimal scenario. I think the goal of this in the end is for feedback to know which scenarios you want us to dive into deeper in our revenue sufficiency analysis. Instead of taking all of those scenarios through this process, take the ones that you're most interested in and make that comparison. So the issues with the existing MRF and staying in the current facility is a lot of limitations. The capacity limitation, the processing limitation, and currently what we're hearing is there's also difficulty in staffing that. And that staffing issue is not being offset by technology that's available to make the process more efficient. So the goal of this analysis in evaluating these other scenarios is comparing that status quo to what your goals are of being able to grow, being able to get cleaner bales so that you can demand a higher market price for your recyclables, and using that automation to offset that labor demand that's creating some difficulties. So scenario one is what Josh referred to as the do nothing scenario. So that's the status quo. That is continuing to operate exactly where you are and exactly how you are. For comparison purposes, we did put in labor to where it should be fully operated. That way all scenarios were equally matched and we're comparing apples to apples. The benefit to this is that there's no upfront capital investment. You do have some aging infrastructure, some aging equipment that over time, as Josh said, when it breaks, you fix it. When it breaks, you repair it. So, you know, that equipment becomes more expensive over time to maintain, but you don't have that large upfront capital expenditure. But you're still going to look at all of those limitations. You've maxed out the amount of tonnage that you can process. And there's a lot of efficiencies that are lost because currently all of those recyclables are having to be manually sorted twice in order to get the lower quality bales that you currently are producing in your MRF. The retrofit is taking that existing scenario and adding the technology, doing what we can to move the current scenario in the direction of being more efficient. It has the lowest capital investment of any of the other scenarios other than the do nothing, obviously, because you're not building from scratch. It's not a greenfield scenario, but you're still seeing the exact same limitations that you're seeing on your status quo. You still don't have the room to process more tonnage. You still have bales being stored outside. You still struggle to have the correct amount of labor to do your sorting. And it limits your ability to introduce that automation. And so your quality still remains at that lower dollar amount. Then we look into scenarios 3 through 5 are the 3 greenfield scenarios. They are very similar in that they're new construction from the new site that Josh just showed us, but the capacities are different. So we looked at 35,000, 40,000, and 50,000 tons per year is the processing capacity of these new facilities. The new building has the ability to grow. It has reduced overtime, reduced labor demand, and you'll have cleaner bales of recyclables. You won't have the outdoor storage. You'll be able to demand that higher market price for the recyclables produced. But these also come at the expense of the highest capital investment because they are that greenfield from scratch construction. So we compare short-term benefits and long-term payoff in our analysis. The first slide you're seeing here is the annualized net revenue. And you can see that the do nothing, the status quo option, which is the gray line on your screen, it very, very quickly tapers off and actually ends up producing negative returns in those out years. It becomes more expensive to operate. And in these scenarios, the 50K or 50,000 tons per year shows to be the most profitable. The bumps you're seeing are anticipated capital improvements for that equipment. We know that equipment and technology, it doesn't last forever. So the way we kind of normalize that is to have a fund set up where it's being contributed to annually. And then in the years that equipment is needing to be replaced or updated or maintained, it's being spent. So trying to keep that playing field as smooth as possible. Cumulatively, we see the same where that 50,000 tons per year option is still your most beneficial option, and that your status quo option ends up negative in those out years. And you can kind of see in the middle options kind of play around there for a few years and taper off, your retrofit being the next least desirable scenario to the status quo. So we take that information and we're looking at those next steps in our decision-making, your decision-making, which is to look at those scenarios and decide which of those scenarios are scenarios you want to delve deeper, where we do a full revenue sufficiency analysis, on those scenarios. I think ideally Josh and Sarah would like to hear about 2 of the scenarios that are the kind of the top 2. But over the life of the facility, looking at that 30 years out, because this facility is going to be with your community into the future. And we want to make sure that it's financially healthy and fiscally the most beneficial. So you invest here at the onset to have the payoff over those 30 years of being more successful MRF. So the next step is that comprehensive revenue sufficiency analysis of the scenarios that the committee here would like to see. And Vita, I will hand the microphone back to you.
Okay, so, and I apologize. I have tried to move my camera around since the last time I met with you all. I have been struck by middle age, and now I have to wear glasses, and I realize that you can't really see my face. So I apologize. I think that this is where Josh wanted to maybe bring up some of the questions that we've received, and we can start to address them. Also, I'll say that I am a consultant at heart, which means that if you let this go, I will talk into infinity. So feel free to interrupt at any point should you have any questions that you feel like we're not addressing adequately.
And Kellen, if you could stop the screen share, that would be helpful. And then Josh can pull up our questions that we received.
Okay. Move this over. Can everybody see that? Oh, no, you probably can't. Hold on, I'll put it over there. Okay, can everybody see that?
Here are the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, there's those questions.
All right, so, at this point, I'm just gonna jump right into them. I see Kelton added one, so we'll address that at the end of this, but question number 1 in the appendix, recycling capacities of status quo and retrofit options are shown as 48,000 tons per year and 50,000 tons per year, respectively, comparable or equal to the capacity of the largest greenfield, 50,000 tons per year. Why so when the main text describes the status quo and retrofit options as capacity limited? And as indicated, we're calling them capacity limited because at the starting point, the greenfield 50,000, the retro 50,000, and the status quo 48,000 is where we're starting in day 1. But as you extend it over a 25, 30-year period, the retrofit and the status quo don't gain more tons because they don't have room to gain more tons, where all the greenfields, we anticipated growing tons. Now, the 50,000 ton per year greenfield, we anticipated over a 30-year period would probably get to about 60,000 tons just because we've educated our community very well. We have a high rate of recycling, so it would probably be tracking more with either different commodities coming online or more production of, say, like a polypropylene plastic, and then also population growth. And anybody else jump in if you need to. Comment in page 3 of the main text. SES engineers recommend running additional financial projections. The appendix schedule 2 shows an assuming CPI of 1.73%, an M annual escalator of 3%, a labor cost escalating at 5%, and a bond interest at 2%. I would recommend running additional projections at a higher assumed bond rate and possibly a higher assumed CPI. And that would be what the revenue sufficiency, which we'll bring to you next month, will really dig into. We're recommending to pick 1 or 2 or a couple of these options, and then that revenue sufficiency will take the deeper dive and really test the sensitivities on these things over the 30-year period.
I'll just jump in there as well. The CPI isn't being used in the analysis currently. It is sort of a sounding board, really. It shows us how relevant our anticipated revenue growth projections would be in terms of cost increases and other things. We were just comparing that. It's not actually being used in the calculations in the model that you saw. As far as the interest rates for the borrowing, I could understand the concern because if we were very close in some of our projections, there might be some sensitivity to those interest rates, even in this high level analysis. However, I will say that as we're not cash funding, we're bond funding everything. And the difference then in the scenarios is only that delta in the debt service with the difference in interest rates. Your interest rates for borrowing would have to be astronomical to make even a visible change really in that graph. So it doesn't affect the outcomes in this scenario when we were just using current market rates, current CPI understandings to just look at sort of all other things constant. Let's run this forward and see what the most financially viable scenarios would be. But that interest rate will not affect the outcome of this model.
Question number 3, the main text describes the 2 largest greenfield options as including 2 balers each. At what percentage of full capacity would each option operate? If one of the 2 balers was out of operation, also for all option considers what assumptions have been made about baler downtime. And just to reiterate, the retrofit in the status quo would only have 1 baler. And that's kind of why we're raising the red flag, because we've had that baler go down and we've had to move tons to different facilities through, to be honest, our operators network of MRFs in New England, which was not cheap. But we had to do it because we couldn't stop our recycling program in Chittenden County in northern Vermont. The greenfields, the 35,000 ton would have 1 baler with the potential to increase as tons come in because we'll have built-in room for expansion. The 40,000 and the 50,000 ton options, those both have 2 balers with full redundancy. And when I say full redundancy, it means that as we sort our materials, we could send them to either baler. So if one needs to be down to work, we can work on it and send it to the other one. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we only do have 2 days of downtime in our existing facility, retrofit or not. And so if anything does break, and the baler is probably one of the most important parts of the MRF, we're in big trouble. We're losing significant amounts of money to make sure that the material gets sent somewhere else to be processed. This new MRF will be built in with at least 5 days of storage, which will give us a full week. And also the commodity. So, you take the material in and then you sort it and you put it somewhere. Well, the existing MRF where you put it is really small. Those areas are still designed for a 20,000 ton MRF. So even when those, you can't fill those up, those fill up really fast. This new MRF, once you sort and put them in bunker space is what we call them, those are gonna be much bigger. So we could take in that 5 days, but we could still process and store materials to bale in the event that both balers, we lost redundancy. So that's another reason, for, optimizing and using a greenfield. Question 4, CSWD transitions to a more automated facility. How does CSWD prevent layoffs of existing employees, especially sorters? They aren't our employees, but in the transition from the existing facility to the new facility in a greenfield option, we would be taking those sorters with us. And one of the things to point out is that the existing facility is running at about 18 sorters shy of what the design is. We have positions for 18 people on our fiber line. We're running 1 person there. And that's an artifact of an older facility designed when labor wasn't as expensive as it is now. So that's another risk we're carrying with our existing facility. If somebody was to say, we don't want your fiber anymore, well, then we'd either have to hire up to 18 people to clean it to the level we needed to get it out, which was originally designed, or we'd have to start paying to get rid of our fiber. So that's, pointing that out, which is what we are looking to solve with adding technology. And that's really one of the bigger differences. And we're using that level of sorters to compare them to each other. So we're looking at the existing facility as it was designed to be run, so that we can compare it to a newer facility as it's designed to be run. So with all that said, with the technology and the fact that we are at full capacity in our existing facility, we would be going from hand sorting to QA/QC, which is a much more desirable, which is a less difficult job than actual hand sorting. So we would just transition the bulk of those employees to a more QC related sorting option. A larger facility would give, question or comment number 5, a larger facility would give CSWD more flexibility to process new materials that are not currently considered recyclable. It would give us the opportunity to put technology on our fiber line, which is roughly 30 to 32% of the material we send out of our facility, and try to extract a higher value out of that fiber line, and also to clean it to a value where we would open flexibility to send it to different mills potentially. We do know that there's a mill in Vermont that has requested our material, but where we're at, they can't process what we make. And that would be a great synergy if we could send it to the largest employer in Windham County. And transportation would be much more robust because we wouldn't be going around, the Eastern Seaboard. That's one thing. Another thing we could do is we can focus on particular container products. So one of the things we want to focus on is PP or polypropylene. That's plastic resin number 5. That has been identified as one of the more environmentally conscious plastics to generate. And we're seeing it start to increase in our inbound stream. We currently are handpicking that, an optical sorter, and there's certain things we're missing, right? So tubs can be, certain containers can be a number 5 and are hard to identify as they're zipping across the line, where an optical sorter would be able to pull us out. So we could focus that on a higher value product. And that's the flexibility. We can also, with more room, take lower volume, lower value products and store them until we get a load. One of the problems we have with 55-gallon drums, which is a rigid plastic, is we don't have any room to store them. So we can't really expand a program into that. But if we did, we could also provide that service. I know, like, for instance, in Autumn Harp, we work with them, and they generate a lot of 55-gallon drums. So we would be able to provide that. They're not very high value. It's literally a break even, but we could do that. We could expand that potential process. Question number 6, could cardboard-based and paper-based material leaving the new recycling facility be used as a feedstock for future production of biochar? That is an extremely interesting concept. Right now, it's outside of kind of our mission of what we're doing to get our recycled commodities to the recycled market, as far as those two commodities go. And I'm not against the thought, or at least vetting it, but in this particular venue, I think it would require more conversation outside of this discussion. I also see it because we've looked at, the potential of biochar, which has an extensive amount of uses. It would require some significant capital outside of the capital for the MRF we're proposing. So it would be maybe more of a long-term goal to hit. And again, I'm more than willing to have that discussion because I think it does have a place, especially with some of the solids that are being land applied around the state. Question 7, the proposed 2003 district budget shows a net income of 2.8 million. The base case of SES model shows a net income of 1.4 million. The revenue assumptions are within 5%. The expense assumption in the SES model are 50% higher than the proposed budget. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kellen and Vita, we're assuming that there's 18 more people working at the status quo, which then it roughly equates to $1 million more in cost, which then decreases the net revenue by $1 million. And that was in order to compare, again, each design capacities to each other. And that, again, we're talking risk mitigation, with having that minimized amount of staffing, we do run the risk of our commodity are having difficulty marketing. We haven't had difficulty. Our marketing partners, Casella Waste, have done a great job. It's moving, it's good. But if you look at it over a 30-year period from whenever it is we decide to make a decision, that's rolling the dice, in my opinion.
Josh, I just want to comment a little bit on that as well. So as far as not having difficulty moving fiber, we're also receiving a lower than average revenue on our fiber. So when we look at and compare the average commodity revenue for certain products, our fiber ACR is lower than the region, and we're talking region Northeast. So it would be an opportunity to be able to recover a higher quality, and as you said, potentially be able to also sell much more locally, and to support the mill down in Wyndham. But while we're not having trouble moving the material, it is definitely not at the higher use going out of the door that it could be, and we are realizing lower revenue at the moment.
So again, question 8, SES base case model assumes a headcount of 43. The current staffing is approximately 27. That's because we looked at it based on the design criteria of the facility. Tip fee of $80. There's no discussion on the rate relative to the MRFs and the Northeast. And this is a good point. We will dive into more of this in, I think, the revenue sufficiency, because we recognize that, as Kellen showed, our net revenues are looking very strong, and we recognize, it's market-based, but also tip fee-based. And so we'll address that in the revenue sufficiency. We'll check the sensitivities on that and where we need to break even at. We need to pay our bills, but we also don't need to make a profit. And so we will adjust that through the revenue sufficiency process.
And again, we're looking at, this is a current snapshot, current moment in time. So we're using the current information. Right. We're trying to, again, compare current operations as designed, and then what would be new current operations as designed. I think Josh, you and I recognize the tip fee is not going to be $80 a ton for the next 30 years, but in order to be able to model apples to apples, that's where we landed. Same thing we did do some sensitivity though on the ACR and the average commodity revenue between the different scenarios, and we'll make sure that you mentioned that going down the road too.
Yeah, actually, great segue. Thank you. Question 10, the SES model assumes.
I just thought I should weigh in a little bit on that as well. It's, the question, while it seems reasonable to ask about what other people are charging, it, besides not really being relevant to the analysis here, it doesn't really tell you anything. So I'd say, think of it like your life. If you could buy a house for $200,000 here or for $100,000 an hour away, it isn't necessarily comparing apples to apples. It could have something to do with the market in different areas. And it could also have to do with the condition of that home, improvements, things like that. So think the same thing about the MRF. It may very well be that you have someone who's able to charge a lower fee, but we're dealing with a facility that hasn't been upgraded or maintained properly, that may be desperately in need of repairs. And as we are looking at a snapshot that only tells you what they're charging right now, when it gets to be so far that it does trigger the need for them to put additional capital investment into that facility, that fee could change dramatically. So what we really need to focus on, kind of what Josh was talking about, is what is your cost of service? And while we can compare that to other facilities, it isn't a driver for understanding your particular needs.
Thank you.
If we have questions on your responses, Josh, do you want us to hold those to the end? Or can we, you respond to each of these questions, but I didn't understand one of your responses. So if you just, when you just flip on to the next, then we have this gap.
Leslie, are
How do
you
you
able
want to
to
manage this?
Leslie, are you able to access the chat feature to?
Yes, I did, and I put a question in there, but now I have another question, a question on one of Josh's answers, which made no sense to me. I couldn't understand his answer.
Paul, how would you like to proceed? Paul, you're on mute. Paul, you're muted.
My apologies. With 46 questions, we have a long way to go, but I am very sensitive to Leslie's concerned that we can step over something. How to manage the long list. If we can ask a quick clarifying question, see if that suffices. I prefer to go that route, but I'm going to have to kind of step in and see how it goes. But Leslie, I appreciate what you're saying. Can you go identify the question that was asked and the answer that you're not clear on, and
Right.
quick clarification?
And thank you, Paul and Sarah and everybody for allowing me to interject, but I did not, this is for about question 7 and 8 are essentially have the same issue in common. And I absolutely did not understand Josh's answer. It made no sense to me. So if right now we're running our current facility with 27 people, right?
Correct.
So why all of a sudden do we up that to 43? We might not even have physical space for 43 people in the current facility. So I absolutely don't understand your answer.
No, we do. That's what Josh was saying, is that the design of the current facility is designed for that headcount of 43. And that's where the additional 18 staffers that they don't currently have on the fiber line would be. They would all be in the fiber room. Right now, there's only one and sometimes two, usually one employee manning that fiber line, because we're not focusing on the quality of the fiber. We're able to move it kind of as is, but it does not allow us to access additional markets. Whereas if we were fully staffed per the design parameters, we could probably access different markets. So that's what we're trying to, again, what is the full design capacity of both the current MRF, the existing one today, and future MRFs that we're presenting and running through the scenarios.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm sorry to have to ask yet another follow-up question, because part of this modeling has an important presumption about the increased quality resulting from the greenfield scenarios. Now you're telling me we could have increased quality if we increased our staffing in the current facility. So I'm having,
Well, and the increase in increased staffing obviously is increased costs, right? And that's the point that
yes,
Josh
but
made.
you're increasing costs in order to increase your revenue. In the new scenarios, we're increasing our capital costs in order to increase our revenues. So there's a problem in this modeling here.
Kellen or Vita, do you want to
Yeah,
talk
Vita
about the model?
Dawn.
Well, I mean, so I think we're talking about two different subjects. So we are modeling this scenario with the facility as it is and what the revenues would be. There's not a different answer. This is just saying that to maximize what they can do there, that we would need to add additional staffing. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Essentially, we took the current facility and entered the staff numbers per the design of that facility, which would have increased staff. Of course, if you're operating on a skeleton crew that is working an incredible amount of overtime, your quality is going to suffer for that. But even if they bring that head count, which has been something that was discussed as a difficulty in your guys' scenario, even if you bring that head count, you're still going to run up against the capacity and other restrictions that are also impacting your quality. The duplication of the sorting, the size of your tip floor, those things aren't going to be impacted. So you're still running up against those things that are decreasing the potential quality of those recyclables and the amount you could get when you take those to market.
I'm going to step in here and reflect on some comments that I've seen some of the board members have made, and I think that they may be helpful, because and I'm going to read off Logan's comment. He would love to see the responses written out. Seeing the questions and hearing the replies is tough to follow, reflect on, and consider, especially given the number of questions to work through. I'm going to propose that we follow that with this list of 40 odd questions, work them through and distribute them to board members. And for the remaining time that we have tonight for discussion, to open it up to verbal questions from board members that perhaps those questions might be not quite as deep and technical, but still might be very helpful for the broad range of our board members and their understanding. If that is acceptable to the board, that's what I propose we do. Sarah, do you have a reaction to that? I'll give you first crack.
No, I think that's, oh, go ahead, Josh, you have a.
We were about to brush on question 10, which was an incredibly important question, which might give some insight to just kind of how the model went as far as the low, medium, high ACR concept. And then after that, I can step away. But I think it is important to clarify that. And then if that's amenable to you.
I'll grant you that. Hope you can give it, clarify it for us, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Yep. So in our model, we had the ACR revenues and we had them at a low, medium, and high. We marked the do nothing approach as low. We marked the retrofit as medium, and we marked the greenfields as high. And it was driven by PGA, the cost to manage and move processed glass aggregate. So in our existing facility, we have no real room to expand. And so we manage roughly 6,600 tons of PGA a year. We currently pay $15 a ton to manage it to go out to a quarry. There is only one quarry that takes it in Vermont. There's only one outlet in Vermont. I just checked. Our costs to manage it just went from $5 a ton to $15 a ton. The only other outlet we can find in New England is in Massachusetts, and their cost is $130 a ton. So when I budget our existing facility, glass management is budgeted at roughly between $150,000 and $175,000. And that's because we do have to send some material to Massachusetts every year. Now, with our existing footprint, we've got some solutions to that to get a clean product without the influence of weather, which would require more of a footprint to work in. But I don't see that happening in the existing MRF or a retrofit. So based on that statement, it's up to a $10 loss. Actually, it's up to a $12.50 loss in our ACR if you factor in glass management, if we can't add technology to what we have now. So that was one of the driving forces on that. If we stick with what we're doing, that's why I have it roughly $15 lower than the highest and $10 lower than the medium. So is that helpful for the group? Because that is a very volatile. Did I make it worse? Well,
my sense is we're getting deep technical questions and technical answers that you're losing. You're losing me.
Yeah.
I suspect we're losing other board members, and I would like to bring it back perhaps to a higher level discussion and questions. So I'm going to open it up to the full board and ask folks for questions, starting out perhaps as I would like at a higher level. I personally have one question, but I want to give other board members first crack at it. So, Kelton, your hand is up.
Yep, so I put a message in the chat, and I'm just curious if we can go through all the questions that are going to be answered at a later time. So we're not going through those again. So the rest of that list, just so we're not duplicating and doing it, asking the same questions twice. I'd like to see what other people have already asked.
Yeah, Kelton, I responded that yes, we'll send those out to everybody.
But I would say if we could do it now, that way people don't ask the same questions through this discussion right here. It was my thought we could just read through them all real quick, not having to answer them, but at least read through them.
Is your question, the audio is a little tough, Kelton. I think what you're asking is to just display the questions.
Yeah, or even just read through each question really quick so we know at least what will be addressed when you send out the document with the answers, so that I'm not asking those exact same questions right now, because I don't know what other commissioners have submitted.
I'm not sure. I think I'm going to disagree with you. I'd rather just let board members ask their questions. And if those questions happen to be on the list of 46, that would be realized down the road. But I think we need to engage the full board now.
Josh, I don't think we have 46 questions. I think it was 20.
21 plus what is winding up in the chat.
Sorry, I thought I'd heard 46 earlier. It's my mistake. I
Yeah,
apologize.
I don't want to freak people out, so I just want to verify that. It's a lot of questions, but okay.
Right.
But not that many. So.
And I'm going to take I'd let my response stand, Kelton. I'm sensitive to it, but I'd like to give the board members a chance to ask their questions verbally. If they happen to also appear on that written list, so be it. We'll understand that later. I don't want to be the first to take a crack at it, but I'm not seeing any hands. So I'm going to ask my first very high level question on the scenarios. I'm confused as to why, if we're currently operating, I think I heard between 40,000 and 48,000 tons per year in the current MRF, why do we have several scenarios that are modeled at lower than that capacity? Could we intentionally say we are not going to process as much material? Is that what's going on? That's my question.
Yeah, I know several months back, we were asked sometime last year to model the tons that are just Chittenden County tons. So we took that as our base level of material. And we have a relatively good assumption that 35,000 is that base level, because we know that currently we're receiving about 15 to 18,000 tons from out of district, from a whole host of different haulers. Casella is required to bring 13,000 tons of material from out of district per the current contract. But if for some reason we were just focusing on Chittenden County, and the question was, and this was actually quite some time ago, could a Chittenden County only MRF survive and be profitable and be worth the investment? So that's kind of the base level of the material that is produced in Chittenden County that we know we could, as Josh said, if we needed to flow it to this material through regulation flow control, that's what we would anticipate being able to be receiving in the door. So we're, again, as the model showed, we don't think that would be the best use of the capital dollars. I think we would certainly want to maximize that amount. So we're looking at between 40 and 50,000. And keep in mind too, when we say 50,000, that's the design capacity. It's standard in the industry to certainly push beyond that design capacity. So we already would build in room if we designed a 50,000 ton a year facility, that's built in additional capacity to reach 55, 60,000 tons a year. We wouldn't want to design for a 60 or 65,000 because we wouldn't want to over design, and it's just more money up front and there's not that need to over design. So you design for what we know we have with that additional wiggle room for additional material. Does that explain it?
It does, and just to hear 35, 40,000 is a mid-range number. I believe I understood what you said, and what we're seeing here through the consultants is that financially, using all of the assumptions that still have to be probed, that it would appear that the larger facility capacity of 50,000 tons yields the best long-term return on our investment.
Correct.
Thank you. Ken, you've got a question. You're muted, Ken.
There we go. Sorry. Couple questions for the experts about, this is very exciting, to think about a high-tech MRF. Thank you guys for all the information. I'm curious about how this process works, that we get bales that are valued less. I'm curious about the process. Is somehow each bale sort of analyzed for content? Is it that we have a bad reputation, or that there's some objective measure for this pricing? And does it make sense? I'm curious about the 30-year projection. Right now we have, I think, a 20-year-old MRF. Does it make sense to think that whatever we create now is going to be lasting for 30 years and the technology won't change greatly, or the items that need to be recycled might not change greatly? In fact, might not be much larger, like 60,000 or 70,000. I mean, who knows? So it's kind of a combined question, but that's what I was thinking about.
Great, and thank you. So the current MRF was built in 1993, so it's already nearly 30 years old. So we are definitely, anything that we would do if we were to do a greenfield, that would be the minimum life expectancy that we would want it to have. You want to build it so that it's got maximum flexibility to be able to stay in that same footprint, the same building, and then just either, again, whether it's a retrofit inside, like we modeled here for the current facility, or can you build on? And that's what Josh was showing us at the beginning, was in the greenfield option, there would be the ability to, if we wanted to, extend the building out in a couple of different directions. So we would already be in the design phase, building in the capacity to expand should the tonnages grow, certainly by leaps and bounds. We would want to be able to have that flexibility, and that's what we would design in. The current MRF is, as he said, hemmed in, so there's not that ability to expand the footprint where in a greenfield there would be. So we absolutely would be looking to maximize that construction investment. 30 years is the minimum. You want to get as much out of that as possible. So as far as the lower quality bales, it's not that we don't have a bad reputation. It's that we're not able to take advantage of additional markets. So, for example, right now, our mixed paper, and Josh, you should probably be jumping in on this answer actually, is just all mixed in together. It's junk mail, it's office paper, it's shredded paper, it's all kinds of things. With optical sorting, which is what many of the MRFs in the region and across the country are doing, they're adding opticals to their fiber line, their paper line, so that they can have a standalone bale of sorted office white paper. They can have a standalone residential mix. And anytime you can get a higher bale quality overall, you are able to secure additional markets, additional processors, and a potentially higher price. So the fiber has the best quality index of all of the commodities. So it's published, you can see it, and they do frequently downgrade for quality. So we're fortunate in that we haven't yet received many downgrades, but our markets are restricted by who will take that kind of all lumped in together bale. So we're looking to be able to expand our markets, and as a small market, and Vermont is a very small market, we need to have more, as many options as we can to be able to sell our material to as many customers as possible. Josh, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and to the second part, the material processing flexibility that you had asked about, optical sorting, you can program them to pull a specific fiber resin, or based on a size. A lot of these things are run off of AI or artificial neural networks. So long story short, building in new technology, the technology that exists today gives us the flexibility to shift and focus on different commodities if they start to come in at a larger quantity or a volume that's beneficial to the district to sell. And also with the footprint we're proposing in a greenfield, it gives us that extra space if the newest, latest, greatest, whatever it is comes out, and in 15 years it's vetted, we could do a system upgrade and not have to slam it in on top of what we have. We are leaving room for the potential for QC robots. We don't, at this point, feel that they've gotten to a point to replace humans. although they're close, they're extremely close. And as Sarah had mentioned, that that Greenfield also has about 10,000 square feet of expansion space, which could be extended to 15 if we needed to, because there's space in our parking lot that we've identified. So we're trying to build in, as we can't predict what's coming up in 30 years, but we're trying to be as flexible. We know what our problems are now is that we can't expand, right? And we don't have enough space to get the technology we want in. So that's what we're trying to shoot for with this Greenfield concept.
And while we're on this call, this is Bob Gardner, and while we were on the call, I just pulled up the current markets, for example, in the Northeast relative to mixed paper, sorted residential, sorted clean news, and the range is, pretty substantial, between, if you go for a mixed paper, let's say it's $70 to $75. And then if you go to a sorted clean news, you're upwards of 180 to 195. So you see there's pretty material changes in terms of the pricing that you can get from recyclables if you're able to segregate them.
That's terrific. Thank you very much.
Next question. I'm not seeing any. I'm going to ask my next question, and it goes back to staffing, and this may clarify or it may confuse us even more. I'd like to sidestep the 18 to 1. I did not follow that, but maybe I'm going to dip into that. When I look at Schedule 2 and assumptions in this presentation, there's labor requirements. I see a whole list of staff positions, and I'm wondering, why are we seeing those staff positions? I think I know the answer, but I'd like to get it out for the full board, who might be as confused as I am. Why do we see these labor positions when currently the operation of the MRF is under contract with Casella and they employ staff? So I guess my question is, we see in these assumptions that we would be then employing staff and not Casella. Is that based on the open question? We don't know what the future how the future MRF might be operated, and so you're modeling out these positions as if we operated the MRF.
Oh, not necessarily. So this is, it could be either or, and so it was just an example of, here are the positions that we would anticipate or expect would be needed. We know that these are the certain positions that are in place. For example, so Josh, even the program director and engineer, which is Josh's position, that may or may not be needed depending on if, say a future operator, whether it's Casella or someone else, determines that they need another person kind of overseeing the entire facility. They did have that, and then they promoted that person up through the organization. So what you're seeing as far as the FTEs does represent both Casella's standard suite of employees and potentially what we think we would also use if we were to be the operator. So it's just a list of who we are thinking we would either or would need.
So what I think you're saying, I'm sorry for the follow-up, and I see you, Leslie, next, but these are the list of positions that would be needed to operate this facility. If we were operating it, we would be incurring that directly. If another party, Casella, for example, if they were operating it, these positions would shift over to them, and those costs would be presumably filtered through the arrangement that we have with Casella, whether it's a net revenue, however that would work out. But at least I think I'm understanding. I don't know if it's helpful to the other board members, but I'll leave it at that. Turn it over to you, Leslie. You have a question.
Yeah, I put a question to Sarah in the chat about the potential for additional capacity coming online, and Sarah's response was she didn't know of anyone else building a new MRF, but we know that's not the only way capacity can be increased. Capacity can be increased by retrofitting or bringing in optical sorters. We've heard in all this conversation that other operators are using optical sorters. So I don't feel that my question was answered. In other words, I don't see the competitive environment addressed anywhere. There's just an assumption about linear growth for Chittenden Solid Waste District, irrespective of other kinds of capacity or competitors who might be doing the same kind of planning we're doing. And
Liz,
I
thank
think we
you.
need to know something about that.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I did not see the nuance in that question, and you are correct in that there is additional, there are certainly additional retrofits coming online. We mentioned the one that Casella is considering for Rutland, for example. They have also recently retrofitted and added more capacity as far as able to sort different grades of materials in their Charlestown MRF, for example. Same thing happened in Rhode Island. That is what most of the MRFs that currently are online who already have this existing technology. Again, remember, we're sorting by hand, so we're already behind the 8 ball here. They are adding that additional sorting capacity onto their existing system, retrofitting. What I was referring to was greenfield. So I apologize for misunderstanding your question. So in the region, there are not any completely new MRFs being built, but there are definitely additional sorting technologies and robotics being implemented across the region.
Yeah, so, I think we need, as a board, we need to understand, instead of thinking about, bricks and mortars, we need to think about materials handling capacity. That's what I meant by capacity. And this analysis presumes that there's no other increase in capacity for any of the prospective materials to be handled. And that was my question. I think that it's a big missing piece in this analysis.
I don't think it is presuming that, because we're already saying that your existing facility is one of the larger sizes considered here. The only growth we're assuming in the future is additional tonnage that might occur along with growth in your existing service area, existing haulers that come to you. So just population. There is no assertion that there is additional tonnage that comes with a new facility. If anything, there's a consideration there might be lost tonnage.
You completely misunderstand my point. I'm thinking that there might be other facilities that could pirate, if you will, some of the tonnage that's assumed to come to CSWD. There's a presumption that the private sector is just going to sit around and wait for CSWD to get its act together. I mean, a guy like Myers might be investing in additional materials handling capacity that would no longer come to a CSWD facility. That's what I'm asking about.
But I feel that's a different question than what's being addressed in this analysis. That's a question about whether CSWD can continue to exist because they're competitive facilities and there's no need for your MRF.
Yes.
This is saying what's the optimal situation for an existing facility with existing tonnage. I wasn't understanding that there was some perceived threat that your entire MRF might need to shut down, in which case it wouldn't be wise to invest or even continue operations. It might be best to consider what your alternatives would be. But if we're assuming that your tonnage is relatively constant, at least with the existing customer base that you have, then I think it would be kind of, it's sort of off. I'm not saying it's off topic, but it's really not part of what was being considered here at all. If anything, the consideration was that the existing operations are struggling and could be more financially viable, and they feel that the business is strong.
Vita, you have painted my question in black and white, zero-sum manner, which is not what I was stating. just to make it clear to the rest of the board, this matters because when we're doing a projection of how many tons of materials are going to flow through this facility and what the revenue of those sold materials are going to be, we are assuming that there's going to be no other venue for those materials to be managed. And what I am asking is, are there potentially over the next 30 years other operators who might create capacity that would reduce the amount of capacity being handled by a CSWD facility? I didn't say it would go to zero. I didn't imply it would go to zero. All
Leslie, I
I'm
think
saying is that it could have an impact on the forecast. And that was not taken into consideration. I think it should.
Well,
I think
I
you've
will
stated
say that, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to, we're kind of down in the weeds here. I think, Leslie, you've stated the concern of the question clearly. That's something I think actually for Sarah, just to evaluate, and not for our consultants. I'd only throw out there, this might be a case where flow control might come into play. But that's an important question, but that's outside, I think, the scope of our current discussion here tonight with the presentation of the consultants. But I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm always conscious of the time. We've got a couple more.
No, that's fine. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the question. Alan.
Yeah, their analysis is based on a one-shift operation. Is that my understanding? So that, you know, if and when capacities go much larger, a second shift could be utilized and you know, cover that problem. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And with the addition of technology, the sorting technology, we would be less reliant on human employees if we did need to employ a second shift. So it does provide some additional flexibility for materials management. Yes.
Thank you.
Bryn, your hand was up. You took it down. You're okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to pull us back to center. So that was part of my reason for having my hand up. And just to give some relief that CSWD as a municipality does have the authority to institute flow control, which is part of the reason why the study looked at Chittenden solid waste, Chittenden County materials specifically, because that would be within the parameters of our authority. So in terms of trying to have some assurances about who else might cherry pick the material, that's within the confines of our municipal authority.
Correct.
Paul, your hand was up.
Yeah, no, Bryn just said exactly what I was going to say. So thank you, Bryn.
Hey, Lee, your hand is up. You're muted, Lee.
Sorry about that. I think there was language added in 3.1 of the solid waste management ordinance that CSWD can amend the solid waste management ordinance to require that certain materials be directed to district facilities. So that may help address part of that question, Leslie's question. I don't know.
Correct. Yep, you're exactly
Notice
right.
that was in there.
Yep, exactly right.
Again, we have some still the list of questions, written questions, and there are more in the chat that will be addressed in writing. Are there other board questions to be entertained right now? I want to point out that at the beginning of the presentation, there was a request, I believe, from the consultants, the hope that out of this meeting would be some direction to give them for running these revenue sufficiency analyses. So I'd just like to have a little bit of conversation about that to see if we can come up with that, give them some direction, whether or not it's, first we still would need to answer all these questions, but it might help to move the process along. But Tim, your hand is up. And you're muted.
I was just checking on the process. Are you saying that we're not going to answer any of the written questions? We're just going to take oral questions tonight?
That was what I was trying to do in recognition of the list of questions and the time, but I am not trying to squash the examination of those questions. I'm more conscious of board member timeframes and mental capacity as the night goes on, and in a way to answer technical questions.
I guess I find that pretty frustrating, since we were told that the process was to go ahead and submit written questions, and now we got down to some very meaty issues, and now we've punted on that. And there are some significant ones left.
I'm only, I only serve it and direct the full board, and I would have to throw it back to the full board then to get a sense from them how they would prefer to proceed tonight.
Are we all prepared to answer the additional questions that we hadn't gotten to?
I have a thought. I would say if Josh is able to review the list and see if there's anything that is pertinent to our consultants to help and assist with clarification, I would say we should prioritize those questions since we have them tonight.
There are a few things I could say right now that I think might help. In regards to some things that were mentioned in the chat, some comments that were submitted that I think that I can clarify where they fall into this analysis. And it's becoming very clear that I think we need to talk about what a cost benefit analysis is and what a revenue sufficiency analysis is, because I think we are asking questions that have not been addressed yet. So a cost benefit analysis is taking a snapshot really of, you know, the year one calculations for if we had all these facilities side by side and we could compare them, the staffing, the expenses, everything else, along with the debt service associated with those facilities. And then just some very reasonable, very high level expectations about market sales rates going forward, growth in the system, things like that. Let's see when we push that forward over 30 years, given the fact that we know there will be cost of renewal and replacement in the system and those kind of things, which one of those scenarios, or however many of those scenarios, which of them might be financially viable in the long term as we push out beyond our 5-year sort of budget and planning look, and we look in the long-term life of that facility, which of those scenarios are likely to remain cash flow positive, and which ones over time will leave the district financially constrained. And that was the concern with the status quo scenario. And that's what we saw in the long term, is that when you're not able to move outside of the bounds of the facility that you had, and somebody pointed out the fact that we built into that a maximum staffing level. This is saying the most that this facility can do is still not going to be enough over time to really let you grow with the potential that you have. So that's all this analysis is meant to do. It's at a very high level. Like I mentioned earlier, I saw someone mention again, interest rates. Understand that the difference in debt service from 2%, let's say now that we're assuming, to maybe 4%, is very minimal in terms of dollars spent in debt service. It is not enough to sway this analysis. It's enough to hurt as you look at your budget from one year to the next and think, wow, I wish we had gotten a lower interest rate. But when you look at that graph, you can see the difference in these scenarios is multiple millions over time, so that potentially, you know, $50,000, $100,000 change in debt service payments from interest rates would not be enough to compete with status quo, which is the only scenario that does not assume debt service. All the rest of them have the same assumption. So as you raise the interest rate, all of their payments would change. So again, this is just looking at running a given set of assumptions out over a long-term projection period. Revenue sufficiency now lets us go into, for those of you that were here, more of what we did when we looked at the ODF a couple of years ago. We went into line item detail. We said, okay, if we're going to build this additional facility and have this capital investment. What does it look like? What does it look like if we do it? What does it look like if we share those costs? How do our revenues change? How do our staffing needs change? What we can consider potential different funding sources. This is where we talk about interest rates, right? If we're going to finance it this year versus in 3 years, how does our interest rate outlook look? What's a conservative assumption to have? And then how might also those project costs change if we delay that project for 3 years? So it's revenue sufficiency now goes out over a more reasonable, probably 10-year projection period, but lets you actually in every year plan for those costs. What does our staffing look like? What does our capital look like? When do we actually start to pay this debt service? When do we start to receive the revenues from this facility being built? It's much more granular. And that's where we consider some of these other things. And back to someone that was asking about, tip fees of other facilities, that's where we look at that in the near term and just begin to examine whether you are particularly unattractive in some way that might in the near term result in a change in business. It is not, however, I think something that is probably a big driver here right now. And again, with the ability to have flow control, that's maybe another subject. But the revenue sufficiency will let us address some of these questions that everyone's been having. The only other thing I remember in the questions that I think is worth addressing is someone had said that we didn't have essentially business case scenario metrics in the analysis. And I would go back to a couple of things. First of all, computations like internal rate of return and payback period are probably much more applicable in the private sector than what you would generally consider in a governmental or quasi-governmental entity, where you're looking at revenue neutrality. You're really looking at what is the best in the long term for your ratepayers, your customers. So we try to look at the most reasonable method of financing, of expenditure and everything else to keep those rates or that need for increase as low as possible over a long-term period. With that said, though, there is no internal rate of return for the new construction scenarios because they're predicted to be and to maintain a cash flow surplus in every year of the projection period because they don't cross zero. There is no internal rate of return calculation, just for anyone who might have really gotten in the weeds over that one. It just doesn't work here. But with the net present value, you saw the graph with the cumulative returns over time. Net present value would just simply discount those, which means those lines would go slightly lower, but the results of the analysis would remain the same. So those are all the questions that I can remember that I thought were pretty relevant to our addressing them. Not sure if I made anything better.
I think this is Bob. I mean, one other comment on the tip fee issue is that is a material business case issue, and it's something that you would ultimately look at as a variable. If you can lower it, you can higher it. That's going to change your net revenue structure. And you look at the market and you determine whether your facility is here, a competing facility is there. What the market differential might be, and what your processing costs. And I think $80 per ton is at this juncture is a pretty reasonable assumption. At least based on my experience on what the processing costs are associated with recycling facilities.
Ken, your hand has been up. You're muted. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Ken.
Okay. I wanted to address Paul's question to the board about looking at the board for direction. I'm reacting a little bit to Tim's comment as well. I understand it's frustrating to submit questions and then not have them all addressed, but it seems like, the situation on the ground, calls for Paul to make that kind of decision. I personally, as a new board member, appreciate the higher level approach. I really appreciate Vita's description. The charts and the stuff that was sent to us made it, was very exciting and made it very clear to me that we should be looking more deeply at the greenfield 50,000 tons. I imagine everybody else feels similar to that. So if the board can find a way, if Paul can find a way to let people who want to get into the weeds at the appropriate time, I think that'd be great. And for the rest of us, the find things like through analysis would be really helpful, because I've never heard that term before. So thanks. I'm just supporting Paul's idea of putting it in writing and letting people get into the weeds in a committee or some other form.
Thank you, Ken. However we deal with these responses, it'll be presented to the full board, not at this point, not a subcommittee. I would bring it back again to try to give Sarah and SDS some direction as to what scenarios we think are most likely that we want to pursue. Kelton.
I think just jumping to Tim's comments there, I'd love to see an actual base case of what we have. The base case is what we're currently operating at, and I'd love to see a more in-depth analysis rather than what we might be operating at. I'd rather see a base case of what we're actually operating at right now and see an analysis of that compared with one of the bigger options, because I feel like, again, there's a lot of stuff thrown in there, and from these comments, I could see that isn't necessarily what we're currently operating at, and I feel like it almost makes it look like the other models are better than the current either retrofit or base model, and that's just how I feel.
Liz.
Yeah, hi everybody. If I'm just going to put myself out there on a limb and put the first thought out for where to focus, and I would say look at the retrofit and the 50,000 greenfield. Based on all the things that I've read and the questions that I did hear the answers to, that's where I would go. Just going to put that out there. Start it up.
Thank you, Liz. It's important to get a sense of the full board where we want to go here. So I really encourage other board members who've got an opinion to weigh in. Bryn.
I support Liz's recommendation.
Thank you, Bryn. Leslie.
I agree as well, but I do think we need to see the written answers to all those questions, because it will help us make a stronger, better decision after we have the more in-depth analysis on whatever two cases come to us. So I wouldn't want to lose that.
Definitely. I just want to remind the board, we've been in a 3-year process. I think we have to be careful not to kind of get ourselves right back into questioning, going back to square one on this entire process. I would frame it that 3 years ago it was determined that our current MRF was inadequate. We needed to do something about it. I think already the case of the status quo, do nothing, would be unacceptable, unpreferable, unwise for this board to pursue that. So my comment is that we need to continue to move this process forward and not lose sight of the fact that we've been at it for 3 years. And Paul Stabler.
Yeah, at the risk of asking SCS to repeat themselves, I know you've talked about it a bit, but could you describe again what you're going to be bringing to us next month, just so I can fully understand kind of your approach and what you're bringing to us next month?
So the revenue sufficiency analysis, for people that are wanting to see more about status quo, it really will reflect that, because you're correct. Maybe we named that one incorrectly on this one. It was sort of maximizing your current operations. But what your budget will reflect, which is what the revenue sufficiency model is reflected off of, is how you currently operate. And so we'll have a 10-year projection of that with all the expectations. And that does include expectations about growth and tonnage in the near term. And then looking at multiple years of history to come up with the best predictor that we can get there. It will model each individual revenue stream according to as much detail as we can get. And then the same thing with the expenses in line item detail. We talk about your salaries and the related benefits costs in every line item in the operating budget, as well as the existing capital program fully funded, meaning that if there are things that you know that are necessary to keep the current facility operational, let's go ahead and program those into the 10-year capital improvement program, understanding that those are going to have to be dealt with at some point. And so then we'll have the status quo, but in a very detailed scenario. And then we will overlay that with the additional scenarios, which is why yeah, it's not really Sarah and Josh that are asking, why we ask that you give us the key scenarios, because we're going through every single line item in the budget for every one of them. But if we can narrow it down to a few that you really want to see, then we'll do the same thing for each one of those. And we have graphs that will let you compare side by side each one of those potential scenarios to let you see if our current facility, maybe we know on the average, tip fees or material sales will need to go up by 1 or 2% a year. And if we have this new facility, this new capital investment, what does that look like? Does it trigger higher or lower need for additional revenue in the near term? What does that look like? I mean, it's a lot more detailed, and it will let you plan year over year. So if it's too late this year to imagine that you would fully be constructing a facility within fiscal year 22. So let's say design and engineering started in fiscal year 23 and construction is the following year. Let's plan that out so that you guys can get a better expectation. This cost benefit analysis was only meant to give you a representation of which scenarios in the long term look to be the most obviously profitable. If there were any that were incredibly close, we might have had to go to a deeper level, but you could see where those lines kind of really diverged in the longer term. So I think it was easier to see which scenarios maybe we might want to address in the revenue sufficiency. Does that help with what you're asking? Okay, good.
Thank you. Liz, your hand was up and then it came down. I don't know if you wanted to make a further comment.
No, I'm all set. I just hit the wrong button. Thanks.
Thank you. Tim.
In your letter, it says source data, assumptions, and scenarios. It says CSWD provided estimated operating expenses, capital and equipment costs, labor and overtime expectations, and anticipated borrowing terms for each scenario. And so I'm just wondering, what assumptions did SCS bring to the table? Who brought ACR assumptions and mix on ACR and sensitivity on ACR, or were those provided by CSWD or SCS?
I would, well, let me start by saying, when we say they provided it, that's kind of a loose interpretation of how we work. Josh and Sarah will tell you that you get pretty tired of my face after a while. So most of these assumptions were derived from actual meetings with staff. And then that's why Bob Gardner is part of this analysis, because as he told you, he's SCS's head of solid waste and has done a lot of similar studies. So any assumptions that we made, we tried to vet with him to make sure that they made sense, not only in year one, but over the longer term, that those expectations that we had would make sense for a facility or facilities of those various sizes. So I would say it was a pretty interactive process, honestly, but it did start out with Josh looking at your current budget and us talking about how that would change and specifically why. So for example, you could see in the model that we got to the staffing numbers or to the salary and benefits numbers by saying, okay, if we have this many staff in this facility, what would it look like in a newer facility? And then if we can also have optical sorting, how does that change the staffing and in what year might that happen? And so we tried to get as detailed as we could with the understanding that, we don't have a perfect crystal ball, but we did work together on those.
Where did the ACR numbers come from?
As far as the revenues,
Yes.
so for each scenario, I think Josh explained earlier where he got the low, medium, high numbers from. So it was the assumption of those low, medium, high material sales rates, along with your, I would call it contamination. Am I using the right word here, Josh? The inbound versus outbound, or the inbound versus tonnage that can actually be sold at market. And so when you multiply those together, and that was just taken from your historical, I guess, contamination amounts. And then going forward in the future, there was the expectation that there would be some growth in revenues over time just due to growth in the system and or the need for revenue increases from one place or another. It might be due to increases in material sales. It might be due to the need to raise your tipping fee, but that was kind of just a general assumption.
And give you a flavor in terms of the numbers. They are highly variable, obviously, over time. I mean, you look over the last 3 years, the ACRs that you're paying, and when the China sword came down, it was like the world was ending for most recycling facilities, as most of you probably are aware. And that's moderated over the last year or two in terms of the prices that you're able to get for your commodities, which is great, which really helps improve. And so I think the assumptions that were used relative to the low, medium, and high, gosh, is good an estimate at this juncture based upon how life is, and you may actually get better at some points. And we've seen that increase in, for example, mixed paper, which you had to pay for about 2 years ago to get rid of. You're now getting a fairly decent price for those materials, which is great, which really helps the overall financial picture of these facilities.
Was that sufficient for what you were asking?
I have a follow-on question when it's my turn.
Okay.
Tim, go ahead.
You said, Tim, you had a follow-on question?
Yeah, I didn't want to give some other folks a chance.
Okay. I see no other hands raised, so go for it.
It seems like there's a bit of an elephant in the room here about us moving away from we own a MRF and we own the equipment in the MRF and we contract for operation today, and we've been very successful with that model. And all the scenarios that we're looking going forward, and which is have us owning and the building and the equipment and operating that MRF. And unfortunately, that's caused a lot of confusion, I think, in looking at this base case, because we've inflated the costs of our current operation and pretty significantly understated our revenue, which makes all the other scenarios unfavorable. So that's point number one, so I think it's very dangerous to go ahead and look at these graphs and say, oh yes, we're clearly going to focus on these scenarios and discount these other scenarios, because accepting the base case as the base case is making a very serious mistake in my estimate. And those numbers are pretty simple to prove out. Just go ahead and look at the income that we generate today from the MRF and look at the income that this base case generates. So we're not talking apples to apples, we're talking anything but I guess the bigger issue, for one of the larger issues for me, is I'm fine with the districts exploring operating a MRF, but we'd be taking on an awful lot, I guess, in my mind, saying, hey, we don't have any experience operating MRF and we don't have any experience marketing materials. Now we're going to go ahead and build a brand new facility with technology that we're not familiar with, and we're going to go ahead and operate that equipment that we're not familiar with, and we're going to market the materials that we haven't demonstrated any capability in. So I'm worried that we're painting ourselves into a corner, and I would argue very strongly saying, if we really think we want to head in this direction, fine, let's go ahead and bring the contract to Casella to a close today, and let's get some experience operating the MRF as is, and prove that we can operate the existing MRF and market the existing materials. And then once we demonstrate that, let's go ahead and make the investment. But I'm just wondering if staff has any comment about are, for example, am I reading the scenarios wrong?
Sarah, would you please respond?
Yeah, in a word, yes. So it's agnostic as to who is operating, right? So we don't say these are CSWD's employees or these are an operator's employees. It's just these are the employees that would be needed to run any of the scenarios. So we're not making that assumption. I have said to the board that we haven't gone out to bid for the operations of the MRF maybe 20 years. So it's not a bad exercise to run, Tim, to your point, to say, okay, if we're going to have an understanding of what it could look like, we should run that exercise. We also may want to consider going out to bid, and I've been upfront with Casella about that. So, but as far as how we're displaying the information in the models, no, we're not saying this is definitely us, staff, Josh and I saying we're going to run this. We are not actually stating that. These are the employees who would be needed, and under these scenarios, given different technology, materials that run through, these are the assumptions of the number of employees that we would expect, again, based on our best estimates. Casella or Waste Connections or Waste Management, whoever might bid on it, may have a different take, and that would be reflected in a response to an RFP for operating a facility if you want to go down that road. So, we are though assuming that CSWD still wants to own the MRF. And that is based on the retreat that we had back in 2018. That was the direction that we received, my team and I received from the board to say, yes, we do still want to be in this business. So from that perspective, yes, you're reading that correctly. And it is yet to be determined whether or not it makes sense for CSWD to operate. And you're right, the costs would certainly increase if we were to take that on. It's another 25 plus employees. It's not to be taken lightly.
Josh, I believe you wanted to add a
I
comment.
don't want to, yeah, I'm going to keep this short so I don't get too far in the weeds, but Schedule 3 does have a brokerage fee that we assumed as a cost, because we definitely do not want to assume that we're going to market the material ourselves. So that's where that marketing comes into place. There was some work to make sure it was agnostic so that we could, take with what we knew, how Casella runs the existing facility, and then really be able to say if they choose to run it or if they are awarded or if anybody is awarded, there would be a processing fee involved, which is how we're initially set up. And I'm going to stop there because I'm just going to get into the weeds and it's not going to be helpful.
And just the last comment about the experience in running a MRF, I do want to remind the board, and actually let some of the newer members know who may not know my background, but I did run a MRF and I did manage marketing commodities contracts when I was at Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation. I did manage a $17 million retrofit of the only MRF in Rhode Island that now is running 125,000 tons through. So you do have some professional experience in running these facilities. Do I know how to program the optical sorters? No. Would I want us to be doing that? No. That's what we hire people to do. The manufacturers do that, and that's part of that contract. So there are certainly things that we would need to learn and go in with our eyes wide open if that were a choice that we were to be made. But we are not completely complete newbies when it comes to this. And again, we have the 30 years of experience of working, with the existing facility hand in hand. And Josh has taken a much closer hand in understanding the operations of the current facility than any previous MRF manager has.
Just one more thing. I will say that this is another thing that I think would be addressed in more detail in the revenue sufficiency analysis. This cost benefit analysis, even in the way we described the scope when we proposed to help, is a comparison of facilities. This is looking at what these facilities can potentially do, what the revenues and expenses would be with a realistic CSWD scenario. But if we're told we want to really compare in depth, the idea of, these few facilities, and we think we might either contract or operate it ourselves, there would likely be differences in that line item budget that we would address at that time. So there is the intention of that being addressed, but the analysis you're seeing today is really the potential for the facilities themselves.
Bryn,
And I just want to follow up with Sarah's last comment. Like, I do think there is, I personally have a great deal of confidence in Sarah and in the CSWD staff. I do think that the do nothing option really is kind of fatal. And I, from the sense of the board, I do think that there's agreement that we need to do something, and what that something is what we're discussing. But I do have confidence that everybody's asking excellent questions. We don't have all of the answers right now. That's part of the process that we're going through. So I really appreciate the effort that's been put into bringing us to this point. There are a number of new board commissioners here, so it's hard to give the context and framework for where we've been over the last few years. So I don't know if there is a need or benefit to having another follow-up meeting. I know there's going to be another analysis, but in terms of the timing, if there's particular timing that we're aiming to have a decision by, and I know it was yesterday, but if it's before the end of the fiscal year, then I would say it may behoove us to have some additional meetings about this particular topic so that we can just move forward faster.
Bryn, you speak as if you were the chair of the board. But thank you. And I think it was, I appreciate your comments. I want to look again at the clock. It is 8:20. We have another item on the agenda tonight. And this is on schedule for February. So the conversation can be continued. I don't want to give anybody the impression that we're cutting off conversation, but for the management of a meeting tonight, I would encourage us to move on to the next agenda item. Josh, your hand is up. One final comment.
One final comment. I would recommend any new board members for context to come on a tour between maybe now and the next meeting. That would be really helpful to put into kind of framework of what we're talking about it while it's actually happening. I think that would be extremely helpful. For anybody who wants a refresher, I'm more than willing to walk anybody through the place. So just run it out there.
Thank you, Josh. Then I'm going to encourage this board to move on to the next agenda item, but I want to thank the SCS staff for being present tonight and offering your contributions and hearing all of our deep discussion and concerns. I hope you've taken that seriously and can roll that into your next step of this work. And again, the written questions, and there are a lot in the chat, will be addressed and disseminated to the full board. I'm reminded also on the very first meeting that I chaired that went on very long. I don't know if members need a brief 5-minute recess. I would encourage us to do that. And we could have a motion to do it, or we could just do it by general assent. I have 8:23, so if we meet back at let's say 8:28, let's give it an honest 5 minutes and not keep us going any farther than that. So we'll reconvene at 8:28.
Thank you, Paul.
81 of your board packet. And this again is informational and for discussion purposes tonight. The context here is that we had our drop-off center review last year, and we wanted to continue to keep this high on our list of items to be considering. And the intent is to have some time to address this at just about every meeting going on going forward. So that's the context for what we're coming up with now. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you and staff.
Thank you. So Josh is probably still getting, oh, there he is, because I can't about to. Guys, going to jump into my version, but I know you have an updated version of the PowerPoint. So as Paul mentioned, this is the first iteration of a more in-depth look each month for the next 5 months, for sure. And what we're starting with is level of service. So we're going to do a level of service part 1 this month and level of service part 2 next month. And then in March, April, and May, we'll be talking about economics, pricing, and some customer response, customer survey results. And then when we get to June, we will take a glance back at what we've discussed over January to May, make sure we're on the right track, make sure that if we need to adjust, we can adjust, take that time in July to adjust and get back at it in August through September, October, November. And then in November, December, come back again to the board with, here's what we heard for the entire year. Here's where we see the system going, maybe option 1, option 2, and then have that be kind of that end product of this year-long discussion so that we can see, you know, what do we want the drop-off center system to look like and what we want it to do for the district and for our constituents and everyone who uses the system. So Josh, I will turn it over to you to operate the PowerPoint. I don't think this will take quite as long as the last conversation. So but I do appreciate all of the great conversation that we had. And I anticipate they will continue to have very good conversations about the DOCs. Take it away, Josh.
Everybody see?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. You want to kick it off, Sarah, and start going for it?
You got it.
Okay. So drop-off center system review, as Sarah had mentioned, this is our level of service. This is just kind of getting us an understanding of what we provide and where we want to look at and where we want to go. And this will be in, part of a full series, 6 in a row. So kind of just covering how we got here. I know everybody was at the retreat, but over the last long time, we've been talking about drop-off centers. We have kind of generated a level of consensus that we do want to operate a DOC system, which stands for drop-off center. We want to maintain our existing system. It means the existing facilities we have, we'd like to keep running those. We will only operate in a community that wants us there. And that would be for them to provide us land. Now, in Williston, we own it because that's kind of our hub. It also came with the landfill that we had built in the 90s. In Burlington, we're in communications to work that out. Safety is one of the biggest concerns we have. We have addressed that in multiple retreats, and that is kind of on the top of the board's agenda of things that we want to make sure that we're covering, because there is a significant amount of throughput through all of our facilities, our drop-off center facilities. And we do recognize that some material is subsidized, and that we do want to subsidize that for the better of people's incentive to manage that material in a proper way, I guess. The things we haven't really come to consensus on: scale and scope of services. We've had a lot of good discussion, number of DOCs in the system, locations of DOCs in the systems, and materials to be subsidized and to what extent. So this is from our retreat slide. Drop-off centers, as we look at the next 20 to 25 years of drop-off centers, because that's about where we're at right now from when we first started developing them. We want to look at our challenges and opportunities. Who do we serve and where, to what degree and at what costs, and what do our customers want versus what does the public need? And really, that's kind of level of service. Big surprise is the title of the presentation. And we broke level of service down to kind of 4 major categories: accessibility, materials, uniformity, and cost. And what I'm showing on the right in this picture is a population density map of Chittenden County, and those green stars are all the facilities that we have existing in place. So when we're breaking down accessibility, what we really mean is kind of drive time to a facility. What's an acceptable amount of time to expect a customer to be able to reach our facility? And then at what level of service does that facility provide? And really that was kind of to make sure that people could get access to our facility and that we're not asking them to drive all over the county to find the services that we provide. There are two kind of cut and dry base levels or levels of service. There's kind of the basic MSW recycling, leaf and yard waste, and organics. And that's really what's required by the state. If you offer at a facility MSW collection and management, you have to provide those other three. And that is kind of what we consider the base level of service. That's what you can get as a homeowner. That's what you can go to and drive yourself, to find a facility and manage your materials that way. Full service is currently only offered at Williston, but it will soon be offered at the Casella Richmond facility. Those would be the two in the county as it stands right now. And that really is the full gamut of HHW, special waste, the whole shebang that we offer, appliances, metal, everything. So the other thing in accessibility is, like I had said, if you look at our network of just CSWD specific, we are actually placed in a relatively decent proximity to population density. And if you look at this, the red, there's Burlington, there's Winooski, this is Essex and Williston. So you can see there's Milton. That's kind of the most bang for your buck, is to be as close to the population density as you can, because that can serve the most amount of people with the services you're trying to provide. So again, as I explained earlier, I just kind of wanted to pencil these out for everybody to see. Again, state mandated, we call that the baseline level of service, or we call them the big four. That's on your left. Full service is everything that CSWD and the soon Casella Richmond facility will also provide. ILO, I don't know if dry will, well, that's our full service. That's our full gamut. So looking at the baseline level of service, we also have to include all of our drop-off center facilities, the Meyer, C&D, and Colchester, because they do take, all the four that are required. The C&D, the Casella Waste Transfer Station in Williston, the Casella Waste Management Richmond Drop-Off Center, and then at your disposal in Jericho. That's kind of the network of baseline service. And then really what's expected, and as I had kind of mentioned, what is the level of service? And we broke it down into the network of roads that can lead you to the actual physical location of the facility. And what we found is that within 15 minutes, almost 91% of the population can find a base level of service. If they don't choose to have a subscription hauler, they can go find a facility somewhere in the county. And, this is kind of a point of discussion or pause, or just, I think 15 minutes, and staff thinks 15 minutes is an adequate amount of time. It's a decent, and this isn't, I got stuck behind a bus or cows were walking across the street. This is just average. I got up, I loaded my car, I went to where I wanted to go. So we know there's variability, but that's how that was laid out. And I just want to get the temperature from the board that, that seems reasonable, and that's what we should shoot for in our service level. And if anybody disagrees or says, no, it's crazy, it should be less or more, please speak up. But that was kind of the assumption that we made, and I wanted to point that out at this point.
And Josh, I think part of why we're showing this, the drive time population and showing the universe, is because if we don't as a group think that a 15-minute drive time is adequate, if we think it should be 10 minutes, or if we think it should be 5 minutes, then that's going to dictate the number of facilities that we would need to offer. So that's what that means. Similarly, 30, if we think that, anyway, so I just wanted to clarify that, right now it seems reasonable. And to Josh's point, if we feel comfortable with 15-minute of drive time, and that's not counting, maybe once you get there and you're behind 3 cars or 4 cars or 5 cars, right? It's from kind of door to essentially hopefully door, or am I misunderstanding that, Josh? Is that like in the physical?
Yes, it's to the physical facility, and that's part of the rest of this is hours of operation, days of operation. and then also throughput and what's the expected time for somebody to wait in line,
Okay.
which comes into full service and not full service.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So yeah, that's really the point. If this is acceptable, then, you know, we don't necessarily need to add a baseline level of service to the county, because 91% of the community can get to the actual facility in 15 minutes. That doesn't address how the actual facility interacts with the population. It just says that you can get there. So full service, which is a lot more comprehensive. And really what we want to look at, you know, and identify are what are the factors that come into us wanting to offer full service, or at least the thought process that we work through when we start thinking about a full service facility. And one of the big things is, yes, it takes you 15 minutes to get there, but once you're there, there's a lot of variables that affect or influence how your experience is as a customer. And queuing space is a big one. And queuing space kind of also falls under that category of safety, because some of our facilities had queuing lines that were extended into major roadways. And that was the one thing that we wanted to address, and we have addressed with kind of shifting how we manage trailers. And that's kind of the bullet under that. A trailer takes up the equivalent of 2 car spaces, right? And also a trailer brings in more material, which requires our operator to then manage the cost and pricing structure we have, which also increases the time at the booth and the time in the facility. So it's really, that's what we identified. And that was kind of one of the big things we learned from COVID, is that when, you know, it hit, we learned that, hey, we don't need trailers, we just need to offer a baseline level of service. And we saw our throughput skyrocket. So that was one of the things we learned. And we factor that in to when we start thinking about, if we want full service at more than just Williston, you know, can the site actually manage that in the concept of referring to queuing space? And again, that queuing space also leads into time into and out of the facility, which those all relate. You know, how long you have to wait to get into it and how long you have to wait while you're in it, in the facility. Safety, again, I just kind of covered that. And then the facility's physical footprint, which then plays into kind of the queuing, the safety, and the time. The larger footprint you have, the more you can spread people out, the more you can manage materials, the faster you can get people through, because you can have deliberate spaces and you can find efficiencies. And that's town dependent, because we rely on the towns to offer us the physical space that we set our facilities up at. And then really, when you take a look at a full service setup, you know, if we've got a full service setup next to another, you know, within a 15-minute drive, you know, you don't want to layer them on top of each other. Again, and when I'm saying full service, that, you know, that ultimately also costs more money to manage. You know, it's just a more complex system. But we also see it as something we should offer as a district, because we've, you know, that's what we've kind of covered in our historic retreats. So when you look at kind of our footprint in the county on a full service offering, if you take that concept of a 15-minute drive, we actually only really reached 32% of the county. And I threw in, you know, Richmond there because they, you know, in the spring, I see them up and running, you know, maybe even sooner. So that's just a, you know, another point to stop and say, you know, as a board and as we develop where we want these drop-off centers to go and what we want them to be and look like, with all of the things we just considered on what goes into the thought process of a full service offering at a facility, you know, based on that 15 minutes, we are lacking in that respect to the county. I mean, if you look at the map, Milton, Westford, Underhill, Charlotte, a bulk of Heinsberg, almost all of Shelburne and Huntington are not within that range. You know, again, hence the 32% of the county. So point being made is just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. Sarah, if you have anything to add, throw it in.
No, I think it is startling to see that. And again, you know, there were very specific reasons, and we didn't touch on this, Josh, and maybe we could have had a slide about, you know, why we're only at the one full service. And you know, and that was a result of you know, decisions we made when we had to close down for COVID, and as we were reopening and looking at our staffing concerns and looking at costs and saying, you know, well, how can we consolidate and how can we be more efficient? How can we increase safety at these different facilities, and what are some of the items that are, are factoring into those decisions. But so the reason we're still there is because in many instances it is more efficient for the district. I think further down we ask the question: should that be the leading factor, right? To what degree should and do we want customer convenience to factor in, and so these are where we definitely want some input from you, from the commissioners, to kind of check us on this. But when John Dorwart did this particular slide for the presentation, it was pretty striking for me anyway.
Normally, I like to do a presentation, go through it, but Alan has a hand up, and I suspect it might be an appropriate time to let you pose your question or comment, Alan.
I mean, if there was a 20-minute drive time in the chart, it would be significantly different going all the way up to 30. I bet you we'd have 65% of the county within 25 minutes, within 20 minutes.
And that raises the point, is 15 minutes adequate, or would 20 minutes be adequate? Is 90% of the county adequate? Is 60% of the county adequate? Like what, again, level of service, and everything comes ultimately with a cost, right? We could provide as much as we wanted to, but it would cost more money. So that's kind of that's exactly along the line of some thinking that I wanted kind of to pose in this discussion.
Ken, your hand is up, but you're muted.
Okay, just to weigh in, I really, being in Charlotte, I've felt this, trying to get my, things in my trailer to where can I go? I'm not about, my personal leaning is not to emphasize the efficiency and the dollar amount spent on these things. I'd like to see full service drop-off centers for 90% of the people within 20 minutes. I'm just making that up, but I would drive 20 minutes. I think drop-off centers with different acceptances is very confusing to the general public and discourages all the sort of learning and recycling and reusing that we're trying to encourage and educate. And I think you guys could do a great job, and it'd be great if everybody could get full service where they needed it. It's weighing in.
Yeah, no, and that kind of falls under one of our categories of uniformity, because it is difficult for our on-call staff to kind of have to look at the book and say, well, this place takes this doesn't do that. And one of the things we want to look at is, how do we make that more convenient to understand? And also, with adding, a big key to this is how long you have to wait once you get there, right? And if you add more full service, then that would then feasibly mean that it's spread out more, so your throughput would increase. So it's a dynamic scenario, and that's why it's kind of I'm meandering through this, carefully, because there's a lot of variables that will affect a lot of other variables. But one of the things that we will bring up kind of as the synopsis in June is, kind of coming back to this point, we can, Alan, to your point, we can look at 20 minutes, we could look at, what we need to do, but, that's kind of where we want to land and make these points now, so that when we bring our synopsis up, we'll define, here's what we've heard and here's what we'll shoot for. And we'll come back with, here's how to meet those requests. But also, as you see at the end of this, we'll get a lot of public input as well, because that's going to be really important also, because those are our customers. So hours of operation and days of operation. Again, we see a lot of people coming into Williston just because they know it's open 6 days a week from 8 to 3:30. That's just your safest bet, and it takes everything. So, some people just say, I'm just going to do it. I'm going there. It's the easiest thing to figure out. I don't have to turn around and do anything. And that's important, in my opinion. But one of the things, you're looking at is factors that go into considering that in hours of operation and days of operation, and I'll walk through this list, but, over the weekend, our recycling centers close Saturday and Sunday. So management of materials becomes more difficult. We have to stage, which is doable. We just need more space to stage. The transfer station, thank goodness, is open till 1 o'clock on Saturdays. That's really the reason we can stay open on Saturdays, is because we do see a lot of MSW coming through our facilities specifically on Saturdays, but they're closed on Sundays. Winter hours, it gets dark, really dark. So back to kind of the uniformity concept, having a shifted hour system might be more confusing to the public, it might cause more problems than not. Or do we just, and again, I'm throwing a lot of concepts at you, so bear with me. Or do we just say 8 to 6, on these certain days, because we know that we can hit the target group stat, but that relays into staffing. So that's more than one shift, or do we have to do, 4/10? So that plays into how we, a double shift or a split shift at facilities is difficult to manage. It's not unmanageable, and we can do it. But, if we're looking to optimize and make it the most convenient for both us and the public, we have to take these things into account. Roll-off efficiency as well. Right now, being open from 8 to 3:30 allows us, our roll-off team gets in at 5 in the morning, and they manage everything before any traffic happens. It is a straight shot to the transfer station, it is a straight shot to the MRF whenever it is they need, wherever they need to go, whatever they need to do, or if they need to aggregate back at the Williston facility. So we are seeing our highest level of efficiency right now on how we have it set up. But again, we need to take into account the public, right, our customer as well. But that will play a role on how we manage if we change hours and days of service. And then permit limitations. We are currently permitted on the days of the week at each facility. That is in part of the town's, lease agreement with us. So if we do make a shift, which I'm not saying we can't, and I'm not saying towns wouldn't be amenable to that, we would have to step through those. And also PM road trips, right? So that's another big factor, is that if you influence how the commute, the after work commute, that is a significant trigger in a lot of town ordinances and, in the county ordinances, because you were adding to that traffic. Again, can we get around that? Yes. Can we work with that? Yes. But it's just another factor to play. So when you look at our facilities, and this is roughly over 145 days, I went back to like 419, and I thought it was a good kind of snapshot of, takes into account pre-COVID, through COVID. I guess I wouldn't call us post-COVID, but we're our facility operations are kind of normalizing again. And so what we're seeing is, we've had Milton ask for an extra day. And really, when you take a look at these numbers, the thing that jumps out at us is that we are most frequently visited on Saturday. That's because the traditional 9 to 5 focuses their time for us on Saturday. So if you read solely into this, that would make sense. Then a Sunday wouldn't necessarily give us more people, but might actually level out the amount of throughput we have. And it may increase, participation, because if you had both weekend days to manage your materials, I'd see that as a relatively attractive feature. And then bang for your buck on which day of the week makes sense. That would be more of a town specific request and digging into kind of what we're hearing from the population in the specific town. Because everybody's real used to what we've been doing for 27 years. So again, to uniformity, consistency between facilities. So if you have to go into a facility, it's really nice if we color code material management zones, if we number them, however we need to do it. And we are starting that effort. But if you were to go to Heinsberg or to South Burlington and it looked relatively similar, and we had signage that kind of covered the same expected directional patterns, I think that would also increase throughput, because people could then, go to different sites, full service, not full service. I think that's going to play an important role. And then hours and days open. Again, back to that concept, everybody, you can always fall back on Williston because you know when it's open. But I do think we need to consider that when we start making decisions on what the next 20, 25 years of DOCs look like, is that we should have some level of consistency between either baseline and full level service or not. And then again, materials accepted. Do we want to accept everything everywhere? That pushes up against our safety concerns. and our footprint concerns? Or do we want to look at a tiered option? And a tiered option would be kind of the baseline, maybe plus, because it doesn't take a lot of room to add in HHW and some special wastes. So it would be kind of the big four and the things that we could fit on the site, but keep that consistent. And then the full service option, and then keep those two separate things where, baseline plus is all the same things, full service is all the same things. So those are things to look at when we're talking uniformity. And then, again, the last thing, cost. Everybody, if you were to ask the public, be open as much as be open to when I'm ready to come to you, make it as cheap as possible, take everything we can send. But we do want to talk to the public because there are trade-offs in that. And so really, we've got to look at kind of two different things, our operating cost, our capital requirements, and what we want to subsidize. Also from the customer, the convenience and the value for their service. So if we are going to charge at a certain rate, there should be a service value to that rate that we provide them. So really what Sarah had kind of mentioned in the beginning is that we're going to walk you through these months. Next month will be another level of service discussion. And we're going to be collecting data, and I think it's on the next slide. Really, we'd like to kind of survey our public to get their opinion on what it is they want to see and how they want to see it. Our current customers and the general public, because again, year over year, 70% of the population in Chittenden County uses a facility, but they don't necessarily use it for garbage and recycling. So we do provide a significant service to the bulk of the population of the county. And so we really kind of want to get a, just check it again, get a pulse, and really with that, have in mind what changes would look like and what they would want to see. And then, the gaps are, we need to do just another reassessment of, how much does, a pound, what is the density of our materials we manage? Because we know what that goes out, but really, we send materials out of our site after we manage them based on weight, but we manage them in on volume or count. So we just want to do another assessment of that to say, are our assumptions and our densities for a specific size bag of garbage or a specific, volume of recycling, are those accurate? And then that will work into kind of our economics, like, are we charging adequately for the services we're providing? And then what would it cost if we expand, set a baseline, and then what would it cost if we started expanding, or not expanding, like where would we see savings? So all that said, here we are kind of just, really tip of the iceberg, level of service, a lot of concepts I threw at you. I'm open for any comments and, send Sarah any emails on, your thoughts on this. The level of service too is kind of going to be a blue sky discussion, like what money wasn't an option, time, what is the, what is the optimum, what does the board see us as, this is the best you could possibly do. And that'll be next month's discussion. We'll get into economics in March. We'll bring our survey data back in April. We'll go into another economics discussion in May, which will incorporate kind of what the public has input and what our assessment of a bag volume will play into that. And then in June, we'll kind of go over major themes and next steps, like where are we going to go? So we talked about it a bunch, but what are we going to do with it? So that's the basics of kind of where we want to go, because ultimately we may say, hey, we're doing great, we don't want to do anything different. Or we may say we want to radically change. But the idea would be by the end of this year, we have that concept vetted, and then we start implementing it the following year. And it may be over a 5-year plan. It may be a 10-year plan, but that's the basic framework of where we're going.
Thanks, Josh. My observation is you've outlined a number of questions. You've indicated that you're going to be soliciting public input, I think, to help answer some of those questions. How are you looking for board input? You looking for some specific answers tonight or some specific discussion? Or is the intent just to lay these questions out and then come back after we've cogitated a bit and can give you our reasoned responses?
I think the latter, exactly. Let everybody absorb what they just heard, think about it, and then in the next level of service discussion, I can pose the questions or the concepts I brought up and say yay or nay, or is this a direction or a path to go down, or is this, no, let's not look at that, or this, set a hierarchy of things, that are more specifically important to meet out and get better answers to.
And some of those questions, before I turn it over to the board members, what I heard you asking, one was that 15-minute, is that 15-minute drive time relative to the level of service? To me, that was a key question that you're asking. I just want to be clear, not to take up more time by me giving you tonight my response. I have some thoughts, but I'm comfortable with waiting a little bit.
And Paul, I want to remind the group too that we're not looking for any decisions or real answers. We really are looking for input and reflections and directions. Does it make sense kind of where we're headed? So even at next month when we bring kind of level 2 service, we're still not looking for this is the direction we want to definitely do. That will be kind of presented as a couple of options at the end of the year. So I want to just make sure that everyone is comfortable and understanding that was my assumption coming in. If there is something different and there are decisions we need to make along the way, then I want to make sure that we're very clear on what those decision points are.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, Chittenden County has always been head and shoulders above, the rest of the state with respect to service and programs. But it would be very interesting to hear what kind of drop-off service is provided in some of the other counties, because I'm pretty sure there's like one drop-off center in Washington County, and maybe there's 2, but and not that that's critical to our decision-making process, but it's just going to help understand what the rest of the state is like.
Yeah, Alan, that's a good point. And it's more common across the other solid waste management entities in the other districts to have municipalities run local drop-off center type facilities, or to have private entities. So it would be, I think, really interesting to know, is there a similar drive time expectation, for example, in the other locations, or are we over servicing? Are we over serving? Are we under? And what is that comparison? So that's a great question.
Tim.
Josh, two questions. You started off the presentations. You said there's a state regulation that says if you collect MSW, you have to collect A, B, C, and D, correct?
Correct.
Is that site specific or is that entity specific?
It's, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, it's facility specific. If you collect MSW at a facility, and I see.
No, so that's why the hauler in Jericho has to also collect recycling, leaf and yard, and food scraps. So if you are any entity, whether hauler, facility, etc., and you are collecting trash, you must also collect these other items. So it's not was that not clear, Tim?
Yeah, I'm still not sure, but we're collecting MSW at the drop-off centers, and we don't offer the same level of service at each drop-off center. And so, but are you saying we're meeting those 4 requirements?
With the exception of Burlington, and in Burlington, we're only collecting food scraps, and that's fine. We don't have to collect the others because the trigger is trash. So if you're going to collect trash, you have to collect the others. If we only wanted to collect recycling, we could only collect recycling. If we just want to do leaf and yard, we could just do leaf and yard. That's why McNeil does not have to collect the other materials, because all they're doing for us is accepting leaf and yard.
Next question. In the drop-off centers, do they generate cash for other programs, or do they require subsidy from other programs?
They do not generate cash for other programs.
What is that subsidy that our drop-off centers require?
Josh, you have that off the top of your?
I mean, yeah, last year we made a point of it. It was roughly $200,000, and it really came down to the special waste subsidies. you know, the big, yeah, yeah.
For the
Without having it in
materials
front of me, that's the number I remember.
It's the materials that we don't collect a fee for, that we're subsidizing.
You know, I strongly disagree with that view of the drop-off centers. I believe our drop-off centers cost us about $1 million a year.
Well, let's stay focused on the level of service. I hear you, Tim. I think there'd be ample opportunity as we go down this path to continue to hammer away at that.
Right. I just don't think we can't make the discussion about expanding services without a context of cost.
And that's coming up, right? So Josh's last slide was, you know, in March, April, and May. In March and May, we'll be having that economic/pricing conversation.
Can I just jump in and ask a question here?
Yes, Katie, please.
Okay, thank you. So what Tim said actually is a good question about the mandatory collection of food scraps in addition to trash and recycling. I was a part of the staff when that became a thing. And now I live in Westford, which has subscription service. And I've always wondered about this as to why I don't get food scrap collection curbside from Myers. Why does that not happen? Westford doesn't have hardly, with the exception of Front Porch Forum, we don't have any education that comes out our way in Westford. And I don't like to be at the board meeting and speak to my town only, but honestly, I feel a little bit, you know, left out of the discussion because we don't have curbside collection, and we have a subscription service. So I've tried to make this decision through the town board, but I feel like there's me on a soapbox and not everybody in my town knows that mandatory food scrap diversion is a thing. So we need the education here. People in Westford need the option to take their food scrap somewhere because we don't get it automatically collected curbside. I would really like to have some opportunity to, you know, have some enforcement maybe come and talk about that, because if that's the standard for everybody else, and just because we're the town, and I understand that, you know, I would have to go through the hoops of, you know, bureaucracy, but there can't be anything that CSWD can help us with to move that forward in a local government.
Yeah, that really is a factor of the consolidated collection contract in Westford, right? And Burlington will be looking at the same issue, and South Burlington. So that gets to Tim's point, which is, are you talking about a facility, or, you know, is it required by a curbside collection as well? And it's food scraps is an optional curbside collection for haulers and under that system. It's when you're bringing it to somewhere and they are operating as a facility. So the fast trash operation in Jericho, when they are, people are coming to that location, to Nate's location, he is essentially operating as a kind of a daily transfer station, you know, on wheels. So because that's not the situation in a franchised or a contracted service, the rules are different. So while Nate doesn't have a physical, you know, facility, he essentially for a day becomes a facility and is wrapped into that requirement. I just want to make sure that
the chat has some explanations from Jen and Bren that are on point.
They're going to be answered tonight, or is you just suggesting that down the road?
it's in the chat. So what we'll do is,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I think to Katie's point, I think you've just explained why it doesn't happen, but she's making the case something really needs to be done.
And then that does get to local, local options, and many on the call tonight will recall the great discussions and the lengths that the district went to when we were considering district-wide consolidated collection. So I don't know that we need to re-examine that, but there were a lot of these same considerations that were talked about 10-ish years ago.
Yeah, that was not popular at all, so. Yeah, no, Paul can, and Alan can probably remember that. But I just, any help from the district as far as like, we're having a change of guard over at the town clerk's office too. I mean, it's me versus, the people that have been there for a really long time, so.
And we
would
have-
appreciate the help with
Yeah,
that.
no, I hear you. And we provided technical assistance to Burlington and South Burlington in their process. So I would think it could be a similar situation. So Katie, let's connect.
Yeah, fine.
Yep.
Probably just a matter of their contract they have with them too. And I talked with Westford throughout the process for consolidated collection. I think their take is that people have the ability to backyard compost being in a more rural area.
Yeah, we can go through some of the options for you, Katie.
I want to offer my own personal residential observation. I live out in Underhill. I think by choosing to live in some of the outer districts, it was a preference to live in a rural area as opposed to a more cosmopolitan Essex or Williston or some of the communities down that way. So that kind of came with an expectation that I would have to drive 20 minutes to go to a full service grocery store. So factoring that in, if I want to throw out the caution, if you ask people what they want versus what they will accept, you'll get different answers, and they'll never tell you what they'd accept. But if we came up with a decision, so I would, I mean, Jericho Market came in. It's 2 minutes away from my house. I love it. But if it weren't there, I'd be perfectly happy going to Hannaford's in Essex, a 15 to 20 minute drive away. My point is, we need to be careful, especially when we go out to customer surveys. We may be getting the answer we don't need in order to do the right thing. That's my speech.
Good point. Lee?
And just my take on traveling, and I'm not sure where Liz lives in Colchester, but I'm in like that black hole area, Porter's Point Road, where there's no good way to get across Burlington to South Burlington or out to Essex. Whereas if we had one in Burlington, yeah, 12-minute drive from my house. Just saying.
Yeah, I'm on Holy Cross Road. I'm on Holy Cross Road, so our decisions are basically Essex or South Burlington, and rarely do we ever make it out to Williston, only when I've been turned away at Essex because I failed to look at the website properly. So
what about Milton? It's just up the road.
no, Milton is 2025. So
It's always a lot farther than you think.
And
Do
that
we need
kind
further
of plays. Oh, I was just so that plays into the concept of a full service, closer, because Colchester is one of those towns that it's not near a full service area. So that's we'll provide maybe the board, or we'll re-ask the questions next board meeting. I think just kind of the big ones.
Liz, your hand is up again.
yeah, and just I think Paul Stabler put something in the chat about the reason that there are certain locations that do have a DOC and others that don't is that the towns need to provide land. And I know that there have been lots of asks to Colchester in the past. I would still say, put the ask out there to all of these different locations, because you just never know what is happening within the select board, what land might have come into their community. People change, as Katie's just mentioned about their changing of the guard in Westford. So I feel that there needs to be also that kind of communication to say, is this feasible? Is it off the docket? Just putting that out there is that as we go forward, that we're asking, is there land in your space? And is there a need and a want?
Good point.
Alan. Can't hear you.
You're on mute, Alan.
Having dealt with the issue, Liz, a number of times, I don't think it's truly the board's responsibility to go to the town. It's more, yours and the taxpayers in town to go to their select board. We shouldn't be pushing our desires onto the local select boards. We're representatives of those boards, and our communications with them should be, fairly. And I truly don't think it's Sarah's responsibility to go to Colchester and ask for land. But I'm only one voice.
And this was a presentation and informational tonight. Are there other items for discussion? I'm conscious of the hour. It's been a long meeting.
Nope, that's it.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised for this particular issue. We'll bring that to a close. The next item on the agenda is executive session. None was anticipated. I don't believe we have the need for it based on tonight's meeting. Next item on the agenda is other business. I'm aware of no other business at this point to bring before the board. Paul, you want to raise your hand? Muted? You're muted.
Sorry about that. My space bar didn't work. I just wanted to publicly state my appreciation for Mary Ann Reardon's service over the many, many years. I'm grateful that Sarah mentioned that in her executive summary. But yeah, just wanted to say it was always great to have her at the meetings and have her taking our minutes. So I appreciate it greatly.
Thank you for bringing that up, Paul. And with that final comment, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved, Westford.
Thank you. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
It's
Good night.
unanimous.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Long, but it was good and worthwhile.